Chapter 620. Lin Jin kept his word and didn't continue to make things difficult for Patriarch Shui Pao. From this encounter, Lin Jin could tell that Patriarch Shui Pao wasn't at the end of his tether. From the fact that he could summon a second clone and cast a spell that allowed him to casually land on the stone table, Lin Jin could tell that Patriarch Shui Pao still had some strength left. With this, Patriarch Shui Pao wouldn't be easy to deal with. If he was forced into a corner, the man might just try to take him down with him. That would be troublesome, and no one would benefit from it. Since Lin Jin couldn't completely crush Patriarch Shui Pao and the man wanted to keep the peace, there was no need for Lin Jin to fight him to the death. However, leaving just like that wasn't an option either. Lin Jin had purposely stalled for time until the golden-winged monster killed the clone before making his move. Although Patriarch Shui Pao was infuriated, there was nothing he could do. After losing that clone, Patriarch Shui Pao lost at least 500 years of cultivation. It would take at least a few hundred years for him to recover. And Lin Jin was sure that the next time he came, he would be able to crush Patriarch Shui Pao with ease. On the way back, Lin Jin bade farewell to the golden-winged monster and Taoist too. Or rather, Curator bade farewell to them. Since Curator had saved the golden-winged monster's son, the golden-winged monster was naturally respectful and didn't ask any questions. Taoist, who was in a similar situation. Thanks to Curator's spell, not only did he manage to save his arm, but he also gained control of the zombie energy, which greatly increased his strength. He even obtained the zombie dragon, which was the biggest gain. Upon hearing that Curator was leaving, Taoist, who didn't dare to stop him. After all, Curator was a legendary expert to them. Experts like him could come and go as they pleased, their whereabouts unpredictable. After bidding farewell, Lin Jin rode a cloud westward, traveling thousands of miles until he reached the uninhabited mountain region at the border of Grassy Continent. Only then did he land and cast camouflage to remove Curator's disguise, reverting to Lin Jin's original appearance. During his battle with Patriarch Shui Pao and Taoist corpse, Lin Jin had given himself away a little. For example, he had Xiao Hua as his pet beast. However, since Taoist, who and the golden-winged monster didn't know much about this, it shouldn't be a problem. Looking into the distance, the west of the Grassy Continent was a desolate land. Although it was still part of the Central Plains, it didn't belong to any of the continents. Another 10,000 miles, and one would arrive at the border of the Outer Realm. That place was filled with endless miasma. Ordinary people and beasts would never be able to reach such a place. In fact, the border of the Grassy Continent was already a deserted place. There was still thousands of miles of desolation ahead, with steep cliffs and precipitous cliffs. Even birds would find it difficult to fly, let alone humans. The Outer Realm was the place where immortals were exiled. Lin Jin felt that he would have to visit it sooner or later, but now wasn't the time. Right now, Lin Jin felt like he was still lacking. Although Lin Jin wouldn't be afraid, even if he were to face a true immortal with his monster sword, it still wasn't enough. If Lin Jin were to visit the alien lands one day, he had to at least evolve both of his pet beasts to rank 6. Otherwise, it would be too dangerous for him to venture out recklessly. There was no one at the border of Grassy Continent. Lin Jin had only come here to figure out a way for his pet beast to evolve to rank 6. Apart from that, Lin Jin felt like there were many things he needed to ponder about regarding Patriarch Shui Pao's explanation of the fall of immortality and the Heavenly Path Foundation. Could this so-called above the 9 heavens world that Lin Jin had seen before? There were layers upon layers of clouds, countless palaces, and boundless depths. The 9-sky hanging mountain that Patriarch Shui Pao spoke of was most likely the 9 heavens world that Lin Jin had seen. It was also the place where immortal emperors and immortals resided at the peak of immortality. Lin Jin was curious. How did he see the 9 heavens world for no reason? Back then, Lin Jin had used the 5 elements edict to connect to the 9 heavens world by chance. But ultimately, it was because he borrowed the museum's power. Connecting these clues together, Lin Jin seemed to have thought of something. However, This thought was fleeting and difficult to grasp. Just like a person, all he could see was a blurry silhouette, but no matter how hard he tried, he couldn't make out his facial features. Lin Jin's mind was in a whirl. Having his thoughts in a whirl wasn't a good thing. Lin Jin quickly cleared his mind and calmed himself. For some reason, whenever he thought of the Nine Heavens world and the legendary Heavens Foundation Stone that could annihilate immortals, Lin Jin couldn't help but feel agitated. He could only turn his thoughts to other things to calm himself down. Lin Jin began following the museum's method to come up with an evolution method for his two pet beasts. Reaching out, Lin Jin took out a crystal-clear blood bead. It looked like it was condensed from fresh blood. Upon closer inspection, one could see that there was a layer of demonic energy binding this blood bead. This was given to him by the golden-winged demon. After the golden-winged demon killed Patriarch Shue's clone, he used a special method to refine its essence. To put it bluntly, this blood bead contained Patriarch Shue Pao's centuries of cultivation. With this, Lin Jin could at least promote his second pet beast, the Ghost Blood Beast, to rank 6, increasing its strength by another level. As for Xiaohua, Lin Jin still had to think of a way. There was no one around, and no one would disturb Lin Jin. This was the perfect place to evolve his pet beast. Lin Jin released the Ghost Blood Beast. Blood surged under Lin Jin's feet, and soon, the blood converged to form a pool of blood. The blood in the pool was boiling, emitting a murderous aura. A rank 5 Ghost Blood Beast was a terrifying existence. Since the Ghost Blood Beast was born from Patriarch Shue Pao, this was a fact that was already set in stone. Hence, using Patriarch Shue Pao's cultivation to evolve the Ghost Blood Beast was the most appropriate choice. Once the evolution was complete, its combat strength would be on par with Patriarch Shue's clone. It might even be slightly stronger. This was undoubtedly a good thing for Lin Jin. Looking at the boiling pool of blood before him, Lin Jin tossed the blood bead into the pool. The droplets of blood instantly sank into the blood pool. At this moment, the blood pool seemed to be boiling. Blood splattered and roared, constantly changing into the shapes of various beasts. In addition, there were countless howls and screams. It was not an exaggeration to say that it was the wailing of ghosts and the howling of gods. Lin Jin remained unmoved. This was how the Ghost Blood Beast was. After all, it was a rare beast. Patriarch Shue Pao's centuries of cultivation should be enough to push the Ghost Blood Beast to rank 6. When Lin Jin went up against Patriarch Shue Pao in the future, the Ghost Blood Beast would probably come in handy. After all, Patriarch Shue Pao was only rank 7. The boiling blood pool lasted for half an hour before it gradually calmed down. The next instant, a beam of crimson light shot out from the blood pool, instantly dyeing the surroundings crimson. Lin Jin looked around in bewilderment. Everything seemed to be dyed in a layer of crimson, making it look surreal. Had it been anyone else, they would have been scared out of their wits. But Lin Jin could tell that this was a blood-colored barrier. The Ghost Blood Beast had actually created a barrier. By the looks of it, it was much more advanced than Lin Jin's nebula barrier. Lin Jin reached out and grabbed at the air. Immediately, a hand reached out from the blood pool and grasped Lin Jin's hand. Chapter 621. Lin Jin was startled. However, he had weathered many storms, so he could keep his composure. As he held the bloody hand, there was a commotion inside the Museum of Deadly Beasts. The color of blood filled the air, and Lin Jin could see the current status of the Ghost Blood Beast. Rank 6 Ghost Blood Beast. A rare beast of the 5 elements, can form a clone, seal a barrier, and transform at will. There are 2 evolution methods, which are... Lin Jin took a deep breath. After this Ghost Blood Beast evolved to rank 6, its strength had increased tremendously. It even had a few more supernatural powers. Reaching out, Lin Jin pulled a person out of the blood pool. This person looked exactly like Lin Jin. Other than being covered in blood, there was no difference. Lin Jin immediately knew that this was one of the rank 6 Ghost Blood Beast's supernatural powers, the ability to form a clone. Just like Patriarch Shue Pao, who couldn't move his body, he could use a clone to fight his enemies. In the future, Lin Jin could do the same, and this clone would be no weaker. To put it bluntly, this clone was much stronger than Lin Jin without any magical equipment to protect himself. After pulling this blood beast clone out, Lin Jin noticed that the blood in the pool hadn't dried up. It had only been reduced by half. This made Lin Jin's heart skip a beat. Clearly, even if the rank 6 ghost blood beast created a clone, it would still have enough energy to protect Lin Jin. In terms of practicality, this rank 6 ghost blood beast had surpassed Xiaohua. It could attack and defend, and it could even create a barrier. However, after giving it some thought, Lin Jin calmed down. The ghost blood beast was indeed powerful, and its evolution to rank 6 was surprisingly smooth. That was because it had obtained the cultivation of Patriarch Shui Pao's clone. It would be much more difficult for the ghost blood beast to evolve in the future. Lin Jin saw that there were only 2 evolution methods for the ghost blood beast. One was to gather all sorts of treasures that Lin Jin had never heard of before and place the ghost blood beast into the body of a rank 6 pet beast to absorb its soul essence. Only then would there be a 50% chance of evolution. The other method was to devour Patriarch Shui Pao. To Lin Jin, neither of these methods were easy. For the first method, just gathering the necessary resources was already challenging enough. Success might not even be possible even after a few hundred years. Moreover, finding a rank 6 pet beast to devour was no easy feat either. However, the second option was within Lin Jin's scope of consideration. But the problem was, the rarer an exotic beast was, especially one like the ghost blood beast, which was an anomaly even among rare exotic beasts, the harder it was to advance. Even if he devoured Patriarch Shui Pao in the future, Lin Jin reckoned that the spectral blood beast would only evolve to rank 7. For a rank 7 ghost blood beast to reach Patriarch Shui Pao's level, it was considered quite impressive. However, if Lin Jin were to compare it to a rank 9 immortal devourer, it wouldn't stand a chance. The Tao Lord had said that the only way to resist the 9th stage immortal devouring beast was to have a ferocious beast that had also reached the 9th stage. There must be a way for a devil blood beast to ascend to rank 9, but it would be an extremely difficult path. On the other hand, Xiaohua was the most ordinary fire wolf beast to begin with. It was very difficult for him to level up in the beginning, but at the same time, once he reached a higher level, it would be slightly easier for him to advance further than the other ghost blood beasts. Of course, this was only relatively speaking. If Xiaohua really wanted to advance to the 9th rank, it would be as difficult as ascending to the heavens. However, the difficulty of the ghost blood beast's advancement was even greater. It was hellish. With this in mind, Lin Jin knew that he had to focus his attention back on Xiaohua. Lin Jin immediately absorbed the remaining ghost blood beasts in the blood pond into his body before releasing Xiaohua. A ball of flames flew out and coalesced into the little fire wolf beast's appearance. It looked around curiously. Lin Jin reached out to pat Xiaohua on the head. As he read the evolution method provided by the museum, he began to devise a plan. Now that the ghost blood beast was rank 6, Lin Jin would have to depend on Patriarch Shui Pao for the next step. In Lin Jin's eyes, Patriarch Shui Pao was merely a stepping stone for the ghost blood beast. Xiaohua needed to advance to rank 6 as soon as possible. A rank 6 beast was equivalent to an immortal. In other words, it was like a human trying to ascend to immortality. Lin Jin had already chosen one of the evolution methods provided by the museum. However, he needed some rare materials and crystals: Phoenix Feather and 9 Suns Crystal. Currently, Lin Jin didn't have these 2 items. However, he wasn't in a hurry to obtain the Phoenix Feather. With Zhao Jingyan around, he could just ask for some in the visitation hall when he needed them. The 9 Suns Crystal, on the other hand, was a little troublesome. Lin Jin flipped through various books, but he couldn't find a single word about the 9 Suns Crystal. If there were any clues, Lin Jin believed that he wouldn't even frown if he had to travel thousands of miles to find it. At most, he would just visit a few more places. However, if he couldn't even find a trace of the item and its origin was unknown, then that would be troublesome. Fortunately, Lin Jin thought of a possibility. Perhaps the Nine Suns crystal wasn't a natural product, but a man-made creation. So in this world, what kind of artificer would Lin Jin be blind to? The answer was already obvious. Immortals. Of course, these are just Lin Jin's guesses. Whether or not it was true was another matter. Still, it was a possibility. Lin Jin planned to ask the two immortal visitors in detail the next time the visitation hall opened. Calculating the time, it was almost time for the next opening of the visitation hall. Hence, Lin Jin spent the next few days at the border of Grassy Continent, stabilizing the Ghost Blood Beast condition and familiarizing himself with the Rank 6 Ghost Blood Beast's supernatural powers while waiting for the visitation hall to open. Studying the Ghost Blood Beast was easy to immerse oneself in. Once immersed, one would easily forget the passage of time. It wasn't until nightfall, when the visitation hall's doors opened, that Lin Jin snapped out of his daze. Several days had passed since he was immersed in his study, and he didn't even realize it. For the past few days, Lin Jin hadn't had a single drop of water or food. Yet, he didn't feel the slightest bit tired. His stamina and spirit weren't exhausted at all. Lin Jin knew that this was partly due to the improvement in his cultivation and partly due to the enhancement provided by the Ghost Blood Beast. Enhancing one's physique was one of the Ghost Blood Beast's supernatural powers. Now that Lin Jin had a better understanding of the evolved Ghost Blood Beast, he put it aside for now and entered the visitation hall's doors. Inside the visitation hall, many visitors arrived earlier than the last. Those who arrived early were already greeting one another. Other than the two immortal-level newcomers, the others were familiar with each other and chatted casually. If one were to listen closely, they could hear that they were discussing the Black Wind Monster sect. Feng Ziqian and a few other visitors had personally attended the sect's opening ceremony, so they obviously had something to talk about. As for the visitors who couldn't attend, they were all filled with regret. Monsters have always been difficult to tame. Most of them are bloodthirsty and brutal. If there's anyone in this world who can restrain monsters and teach them manners, I think that person is none other than the curator, Yi Yuzhou said casually. It was obvious that Yi Yuzhou did not have a good impression of demon beasts. After all, given his position and his past experiences, he had never seen any kind demon beasts. Therefore, when he found out that the curator had established a demon cultivation sect to educate the demon beasts, Yi Yuzhou was extremely impressed. Just thinking about it, it was hard to imagine how those wild and untamed monsters could behave like humans, being educated and well-mannered. Chapter 622. Yi Yuzhou was not the only one with such thoughts. The others share the same thought. Fey beasts have human faces, but beast hearts. Most of them are untrustworthy. Old Tian and Black Crow shared the same opinion, especially Black Crow. He was an expert of the heretical path, and often interacted with others of the heretical path. The heretical path was also divided into factions. Humans and demons were clearly demarcated. They were usually wary of each other and did not get along well with each other. About that, you guys are overthinking it. At this moment, Feng Ziqian laughed out loud. I personally went to the Black Wind Demon sect. Commander Zhao, didn't you go as well? Zhao Jingyan nodded. Feng Ziqian continued. Fey cultivators are no different from humans, just that their nature is harder to control. But if they are educated by an expert, they will be educated and reasonable like humans. I saw it with my own eyes. There are many powerful characters among the Black Wind Fey sect's Fey cultivators. Their behavior is no different from humans. In fact, if you were to debate with them, you might not even be their match. Feng Ziqian wasn't exaggerating. Everyone nodded. Indeed, even they themselves were different before coming to the visitation hall. Some were heretical experts with cruel methods and violent personalities, while others were composed and knowledgeable. But no matter who it was, they were quickly educated by the curator after coming to the visitation hall. They had to abide by the curator's rules. This was the same for all of them. They did not see the two immortal visitors from the last time. Weren't they obediently waiting for the curator to arrive as well? At the mention of the two immortal visitors, Black Crow, Yi Yuzhou, and the others looked over. After all, they had not interacted much. Therefore, they only exchanged greetings and did not engage in much conversation. However, the two immortals did not put on airs. Yi Yujo, Black Crow, and the others were astonished to see immortals with their own eyes. This news was, in fact, very explosive. If it were to spread, it would definitely cause a stir in the various prefectures. But interestingly, many of the visitors had a tacit understanding not to tell others about the immortals. After all, they had not received the curator's approval. If they spread it and made the curator unhappy, it would be troublesome. Qin Yunshang was extremely dignified. She was dressed in immortal robes and had a faint smile on her face. She stood there silently and focused on the metal door on the second floor. Qin Xiankong was the same. When the two returned from the visitation hall, they had told the elders of their respective sects about the situation. The two sects, Cloud Dao sect and Xian Dao sect, took this matter very seriously. In fact, they had been studying this matter for the past 7 days. Even though they had set up many immortal spells and restrictions beforehand, they could not stop or even delay the visitation hall's door. This was quite miraculous. According to the seniors in the sect, the curator's ability to open the portal far surpassed theirs. In other words, the curator's cultivation level was definitely higher than theirs. With this, the two sects senior to the same sect, he, the curator, he, sect, the curator, and who, the Xiankong. With this in mind, the two immortal sects paid close attention to the visitation hall. They were even cautious. This time, they allowed Qin Yunshang and Chan Xiankong to follow the rules and enter the visitation hall again to find out more about the curator. At the same time, they wanted to befriend him as much as possible. In fact, in the Cloud Dao sect, after Qin Yunshang bowed and stepped into the visitation hall, the current sect master of the Cloud Dao sect, perfected Xianyu, cast an immortal spell to probe the rift. But this time, perfected Master Xianyu's spell was immediately reflected back. Of course, she was the only one who knew this. In an instant, perfected Master Xianyu's expression became extremely strange. There was even a hint of fear. Why is there an aura of the heavenly Tao? Perfected Master Xianyu thought to herself. For a moment, it was as if there were huge waves crashing in her heart. Inside the visitation hall, the many visitors chatted for a while before the metal door on the second floor was finally pushed open. In an instant, the previously raucous visitation hall fell silent. The veteran visitors were used to this. At this moment, even their backs were straighter than before. There was a complete reverence and pure admiration in their eyes. This scene also fell into the eyes of the two new visitors. Although they had seen it once before, this time it was even more profound. After all, they had just spoken to their seniors in the sect. When the seniors deduced curator's cultivation level, the term carefree immortal was enough to scare them. Hollow immortal, true immortal, and carefree immortal. Anyone who could reach the highest level of immortals, no matter who they were, was worthy of their respect. Due to the decline of the immortal path, a small number of immortal sects could only linger on in foreign lands. Even if all of them were added together, there might not even be a single carefree immortal. Back in the day, carefree immortals were as numerous as the hairs on a cow. But during the great calamity of immortal cultivation, most of them had fallen. Now, the number of carefree immortals in this world could be counted on one hand. Most of them were in seclusion and hadn't shown any signs of activity for centuries. After all, Xian Dao sect had a stronger background. It was said that they still had a carefree immortal in charge, but he was in seclusion. On the other hand, the Cloud Dao sect no longer had a carefree immortal. The strongest they had was a true immortal. Compared to the sect during its peak, it was 100 times weaker. Based on this fact alone, Qin Yunshang and Chan Xuankong's expressions of respect weren't just for show. They were sincere reverence. Greetings, curator. Welcome, curator. In an instant, many visitors greeted curator. Lin Jin scanned his surroundings and nodded inwardly when he saw the two immortal visitors. In his quest for a material like the Nine Suns crystal, he might have to rely on these two immortals as his last hope. After all, no one had ever heard of what a Nine Suns crystal was anywhere else. But asking questions required proper methods and methods. After all, Lin Jin was using his identity as the curator, so he couldn't reveal his true thoughts. Hence, he had to put on airs when he needed to. It started with the usual questions and answers. The two immortals fought to speak. One of them mentioned that an elder in his sect had an immortal beast that was still in a deep slumber, and he didn't know why. The other asked how the immortal beast could be treated if it was injured. Since this was the two immortal visitors' second time here, they weren't familiar with many of the rules. For example, if they wanted to ask a question, they had to bring a piece of the beast's skin, scales, or something else. Only then could the curator appraise the item and give an answer. However, these two didn't know about it. Or rather, they had forgotten about it. Anyway, they were just asking questions, but they didn't bring anything out. Lin Jin thought about it. Perhaps he hadn't made himself clear before, so he used this opportunity to explain the visitation hall's rules again. At this, Qin Yunshang and Chen Xiankong quickly nodded. We were careless. Fellow Taoist, ye did remind us before, but we forgot. The fellow Taoist ye they were referring to was obviously Yi Yuzhou. Chapter 6:23. While the other visitors were unorthodox, Yi Yuzhou had always been a practitioner of orthodox cultivation, so he shared a common language with the two immortals. Surprisingly, they shared a good relationship. Seeing that the time was right, Lin Jin raised the question of what the Nine Suns crystal was. Of course, he didn't say he didn't know what the crystal was. On the contrary, he sounded like a teacher asking a student a question. It was as if he was asking how much 1 + 1 equaled. It was the same tone and attitude. Sure enough, other than the two immortal visitors, everyone else, be it Black Crow, Yi Yuzhou, Madame Ghostchild, or Zhao Jingyan, were all deep in thought. None of them had heard of the Nine Suns crystal before. When Qin Yunshang and Chen Xiankong heard the question, a thought popped into their minds. Curator was indeed a carefree immortal. The reason was simple. Even average immortals didn't know about the Nine Suns crystal. It was a unique material that only true immortals could refine. It could be used to refine weapons and was a must-have for fire elemental immortals. In short, it was useless but extremely rare, mainly because it wasn't something an average pseudo-immortal could refine. As this was their first test as curator, both Qin Yunshang and Chen Xiankong were extremely attentive. Just as they were about to speak up, they ended up exchanging awkward glances. It's fine. Let's talk one by one. Qin Yunshang, you go first. Lin Jin abided by ladies first, so he let Qin Yunshang speak first. Based on the two immortal visitors' reactions, Lin Jin knew he had asked the right person. Then, Qin Yunshang cleared her throat and slowly explained the details of the Nine Suns crystal to Lin Jin. Only then did Lin Jin realize that this was indeed a material that only immortals could refine. It was no wonder why there were no records of Nine Suns crystals in Middle-earth. After all, even among immortals, it was rare to come across such an item. Chen Xuankong's explanation was the same. Based on this, Lin Jin concluded that this was the case. Although Lin Jin now knew what the Nine Suns crystal was, knowing about it and being able to get their hands on it were two different things. Besides, the only people who could get their hands on the Nine Suns crystal were Qin Yunshang and Chen Xiankong. However, based on their explanation, it was impossible for these two pseudo-immortals to have a material like the Nine Suns crystal. The next question also confirmed this point. Lin Jin didn't hide the fact that his disciple needed a Nine Sun crystal to evolve his pet beast. If it was Qin Yunshang or Chen Xiankong, Lin Jin would give them a corresponding reward no matter who got them. It was either beast appraisal or treatment. However, upon hearing this, Qin Yunshang and Chen Xiankong looked troubled. At first, Lin Jin thought they were unwilling, but after asking, he realized the situation was more complicated than he thought. Curator, I've only heard of this Nine Suns crystal, but I've never seen it with my own eyes. It's not exactly a rare item, but not many immortals use it. Lin Jin finally understood after Chen Xiankong explained. Firstly, only true immortals could concoct the Nine Yang crystal. However, Most true immortals would have no use for the nine-yang crystal. Only fire-type immortals would use it when making a breakthrough. During the golden age of immortals, there were many fire-type immortals. There are even immortal sects like the Heavenly Sun Immortal Sect and 100 Refined Flame City. Back then, there were a lot of Nine Suns crystals. After all, demand was high. But now that the path of immortals had fallen, these immortal sects no longer existed and fire-type immortals were few and far between. As for those who managed to reach the realm of true immortals, even if there were a few, they were as rare as phoenix feathers and unicorn horns. Who knows, they might be hiding in some remote corner to cultivate. Coincidentally, be it Xian Dao sect or Cloud Path sect, they didn't specialize in fire-type immortals. Their sects didn't have any fire-type true immortals, not even pseudo-immortals. Hence, they couldn't get their hands on Nine Suns crystals even if they wanted to. This time, Lin Jin finally understood. It wasn't that Qin Yunshang and Chun Xiankong didn't want to help, but they had no other choice. Are there any fire-type true immortals in the foreign lands? Lin Jin asked. If Xian Dao sect and Cloud Path sect didn't have one, the other sect should have one, right? Qin Yunshang suddenly said, I've never heard of any fire-type true immortals in the foreign lands. Chun Xiankong nodded. He clearly didn't know either. But we can ask our sect elders when we get back. We should be able to find out, Qin Yunshang said. Lin Jin didn't think much of it. It was an indisputable fact that the path of immortals had fallen. With the threat of a rank 9 immortal devouring beast, the remaining immortals didn't dare to leave the foreign lands. Moreover, their numbers couldn't be compared to when they were at their peak, since they had never heard of any fire-type true immortals. Even if Qin Yunshang and Chun Xiankong went back to ask, they wouldn't have much of a chance. Suddenly, a bold idea popped into Lin Jin's mind. Why didn't he go explore the outer realm? Perhaps there would be some unexpected discoveries. Of course, there would definitely be danger, but high risks had high rewards. Just like the Nine Suns crystal, as long as he could get his hands on it, it would be very easy for him to raise Fiery to the 6th rank. However, rank 6 wasn't his final destination. Lin Jin's ultimate goal was to achieve rank 9, and there were no longer any resources in Heartland that could support Xiaohua or the other pet beasts to rank 6 and above. Hence, he had no choice but to go to the foreign lands. In other words, he had to go there sooner or later. So why not go earlier? The thought flashed through Lin Jin's mind, and he became more determined. Next, Lin Jin asked about the foreign lands. Lin Jin wasn't the only one who wanted to know about this. Others like Black Crow, Yuzhou, and the others were equally curious. To them, perhaps one day, they too would be able to explore the foreign lands. Perhaps a great opportunity would fall upon them. However, the dangers of the foreign lands were undeniable. Unless one has reached the realm of immortals, a mortal body wouldn't be able to resist the corrosion of the miasma. Qin Yunshang didn't hide anything or exaggerate. At this moment, she took out something. It was a sachet. Lin Jin could feel a unique wave of spirit energy coming from it. This is a cloud fragrance sachet, specially crafted by the Cloud Path sect. Wearing it can reduce the corrosion of the miasma. Coincidentally, I have one more with me. If you need it, I can give it to you. Lin Jin was stunned by Qin Yunshang's words. Then, he mused, what a smart fairy. After asking around, it only took him a moment to figure out that Qin Yunshang was interested in the foreign lands and wanted to go there. Moreover, Lin Jin had made it clear that Qin Yunshang's disciple needed a Nine Suns crystal for his pet beast to evolve. This meant that Qin Yunshang's disciple wanted to enter the foreign lands. Chapter 624. Perhaps it was for the trial, or perhaps it was for some other purpose. But no matter what, giving him a sachet that could reduce the corrosive effects of the miasma couldn't be wrong. Of course, Qin Yunshang knew that a carefree immortal, like the curator, must have other means to resist or even eliminate the effects of the miasma. But even if the curator had it, Qin Yunshang could still earn favor. Unbeknownst to Qin Yunshang, her gesture had solved one of Lin Jin's most pressing problems. It was as if she had helped Lin Jin's plan to enter the extraterrestrial realm take a huge step forward. Chun Xiankong hadn't prepared this, but since Qin Yunshang had given it to him, wouldn't he be looked down upon if he didn't reciprocate? Immortals valued their reputation more than anything else, especially in front of a carefree immortal. They couldn't afford to lose face. It was fine if he lost face, but if he lost face for Xiandao's sect, that wouldn't do. Fortunately, Chun Xiankong was prepared as well. He immediately took out a hand-drawn map. The extraterrestrial realm is vast and boundless. Even after hundreds of years of exploration, it's still difficult to get a full picture of it. I have a map with me personally drawn by my senior brother. It records part of the extraterrestrial realm's topography, including the mountains and rivers, as well as some immortal sections. If the curator wishes to explore the extraterrestrial realm, this map might be of some help. At this, Lin Jin looked over with great interest and took the map from her. Good stuff. It only took a little thought to realize how valuable this map was. If one were to really enter the extraterrestrial realm, a map could even save their lives for those who were unfamiliar with the place. The value of this map was immense. Lin Jin thanked him as well, but he felt bad accepting something for nothing. After a moment's thought, he said, I heard that the Cloudpath sect and Xiandao sect both have immortal beasts. One of them is in a coma, while the other is heavily injured. If my disciple has the chance to go to the foreign lands, he will surely pay them a visit and help them solve their problem. Lin Jin nodded. Lin Jin was very confident about this. Weren't immortal beasts just rank 6 beasts? Lin Jin was a professional. Forget rank 6. Even if it was a rank 7 beast, as long as he had the Museum of Deadly Beasts, there was no problem he couldn't solve. Hence, Lin Jin would definitely repay this favor. Although he didn't directly resolve Qin Yunshang and Chun Xuankong's problems, Lin Jin proceeded to explain the beast appraisal mystic art to them. It benefited the two hollow immortals immensely. When Lin Jin thought it was about time to leave, Chun Xiankong thought for a moment and couldn't resist calling out, Curator, please wait. Huh? Stunned, Lin Jin glanced at Chun Xiankong. The man clearly had something to say. Chun Xiankong thought for a moment and said, There's something I'd like to ask the curator. Lin Jin didn't understand why she was acting so bashful. On the other hand, a glint flashed across Qin Yunshang's eyes as if she had thought of something. The corners of her lips curled up. Chun Xiankong stole a glance at Qin Yunshang. Finally, he made up his mind and said, Curator, if you were to encounter a tyrannical immortal beast that you cannot afford to offend or defeat, yet it is blocking your path, how should you deal with it in order to drive it away? At this, Lin Jin fell in a deep thought. The Xiandao sect cared a lot about their face. If he wasn't wrong, they must have encountered a similar problem. Maybe it wasn't the road that was blocked, but the Xiandao sect. In the end, it was Chun Xuankong's words. He couldn't afford to offend or defeat it, but he still had to get rid of this problem. Noticing Chun Xuankong's expression, Lin Jin guessed that he probably didn't want Qin Yunshang to laugh at him. But compared to his reputation, solving this problem was more important. Lin Jin already owed the Xiandao sect a favor, so he had to help them. What immortal beast? Does it have fur, scales, or blood? Lin Jin asked. Other beasts aside, Lin Jin could easily identify even a rank 9 immortal devouring beast. Other beasts aside, Lin Jin could easily identify. This time, Chun Xiankong took out an item. It was a 2-foot-long barb with alternating black and white stripes. It also looked like some kind of unique hair. Chun Xiankong handed it over. Lin Jin touched it, and immediately, the Museum of Deadly Beasts showed him the corresponding identification results. Needless to say, Lin Jin raised an eyebrow at this sight. Rank 7 beast, black mountain honey badger. Ferocious, aggressive, fearless, stubborn, and will not rest until one of them dies. Habits are evolution method. Reading the rank 7 pet beast description, Lin Jin was astounded. This outworld was truly a dangerous place. Any random pet beast here could be compared to Patriarch Shui Pao's true form. It was no wonder that Patriarch Shui Pao was born in an extraterrestrial land. In other words, the continents of Middle-earth were a barren land for beasts. It was difficult for high-level beasts to be born. The extraterrestrial land was the true cradle for high-level beasts. This made Lin Jin's heart skip a beat. Everything else aside, just the variety of high-level beasts here was worth a trip. If he could include more high-level beasts in the Museum of Deadly Beasts, he might even be able to trigger the museum's other rewards. Hence, the extraterrestrial land became even more attractive to Lin Jin. Right now, he had to help Chun Xiankong and the others solve the problem of this Black Mountain honey badger. According to Chun Xiankong and the others, a rank 7 beast was equivalent to a true immortal. Indeed, if this was a true immortal beast, according to the museum's description, its fur could withstand most spells. It could even be said to be immune to them. In that case, most immortals would be helpless against a rank 7 beast. They couldn't afford to provoke it or defeat it. Of course, that was because they didn't have a solution. Everything in this world had a solution. Take the Black Mountain honey badger, for example. It had a fur that could withstand spells and was as strong as a small mountain. An adult Black Mountain honey badger was more than 50 feet tall. If it went berserk, it would be difficult to defend against it. However, no matter how powerful a beast was, it had a weakness. Dealing with it based on its weakness was the so-called solution. Lin Jin pondered for a moment. In fact, he was looking for the rank 7 honey badger's weakness. Then, Lin Jin said, "This beast is called a Black Mountain honey badger. Its strength is equivalent to a true immortal. It'll be difficult to kill it, but it'll be easy to drive it away." At this, Chun Xiankong was overjoyed. The situation was pretty much the same as Lin Jin had guessed. A few days ago, a giant honey badger had appeared in front of Xiandao Sect's mountain gate. This immortal beast was the size of a small hill, and it just lay in front of Xiandao Sect's mountain gate, refusing to leave. This troubled the immortals of Xiandao Sect greatly. No matter what, Xiandao Sect was one of the immortal sections. They had their own reputation, and they couldn't allow a beast to block their mountain gate. If that happened, the immortals of Xiandao Sect would have no choice but to enter through the back door. They couldn't afford to lose face. Chapter 625. However, it was just as Chun Xiankong had said. No one from the Xiandao sect could defeat the rank 7 Black Mountain honey badger, let alone kill it. The badger was very vengeful and refused to leave. They couldn't lure it away even if they wanted to. Hence, Chun Xiankong decided to ask the curator for a solution. He was just giving a try. After all, Chun Xiankong didn't think the curator was capable of doing so. Now that he heard that the curator had a way to get rid of the badger, Chun Xiankong was all ears. Of course, it was for the best. Lin Jin called the man over and whispered into his ear. Chun Xiankong's expression changed several times before realization dawned on him. With a look of pleasant surprise, he bowed at Lin Jin. "Curator, you are so knowledgeable. If you can really get rid of that annoying Black Mountain honey badger, the entire Xiandao sect will be eternally grateful." Chun Xiankong was eager to return home. After all, he wasn't the only one troubled by this. The Black Mountain honey badger had become a sore point for the entire Xiandao sect. From the sect master to the average disciple, everyone treated this as their top priority. Now that there was a solution, Chun Xiankong didn't want to wait a moment longer. As for the method the curator taught him, Chun Xiankong knew it would work. After all, Chun Xiankong was a hollow immortal, so he had some common sense. Chun Xiankong quickly excused himself. Lin Jin wanted to go out and think about it, so he left as well. As for the other visitors in the visitation hall, they could stay for a while longer to interact with each other. Qin Yunshang wasn't in a hurry to leave. Instead, she greeted the other visitors and asked about the curator's situation. She was also curious about the customs of Middle-earth. Back when the great immortal Dao calamity occurred, Qin Yunshang was still young and had just entered the Cloud Dao sect. Over the past 2,000 years, she had been cultivating in an outer realm sect. Even when she ventured outside, she only went to the surrounding outer realm lands. She had never been to the Central Plains. Now Middle-earth was a forbidden land for immortals. Naturally, she was very curious about the human race's homeland. Previously, she only knew a little about it from some of her fellow disciples. After all, those fellow disciples had not been to the Central Plains for a long time, just like her. Now that there were other visitors, she naturally had to seize this opportunity. It was possible that she would never be able to step into the Central Plains again in this lifetime. However, the more this was the case, the more she yearned for her true hometown. As a woman, Qin Yunsheng quickly became familiar with He Qing, Madame Ghostchild, and Zhao Jingyan. The four of them conversed harmoniously. Setting them aside, after Lin Jin exited the visitation hall, he began to come up with a plan. Although Qin Yunsheng and Chun Xinkong had promised to find a way to locate the Nine Suns crystal and try their best to get their hands on one, Lin Jin could tell from their expressions that this would be a difficult task. Ignoring Qin Yunsheng, Chun Xinkong and company probably had to first get rid of the Black Mountain honey badger that was blocking the entrance. Even if he could help him search everywhere, what were the chances of him actually getting it? After all, it was unknown whether or not there were any true immortals in the Outer Realm. Since that was the case, he definitely couldn't just walk on one leg. Since he knew how to raise Xiao Hua to the 6th rank and reach the level of an immortal beast, he shouldn't wait any longer. Lin Jin felt that he had to take the initiative. Outside the realm, Lin Jin planned to make a trip there, not in the future, but now. In terms of strength, Lin Jin was still a step away from becoming an immortal. But that didn't stop him from having so many treasures in his possession. Immortal binding rope, Foresee's gourd, and breezy sword. These items could both attack and defend. Even without his pet beast, he could stand shoulder to shoulder with an immortal. Lin Jin had absolute confidence in this. Just the breezy sword alone was no different from those so-called immortal swords. In addition, Lin Jin had the immortal level rank 6 ghost blood beast. If he could create a ghost blood clone, escaping wouldn't be a problem. If he could help Xiao Hua level up successfully, it would all be worth it. There was no such thing as a free lunch in this world. If he wanted to improve his strength and crush his enemies, he had to take risks. After figuring this out, Lin Jin made up his mind. Steady. Summoning the cloud again, Lin Jin rode it and continued westward. He had to pass through a deserted land for thousands of miles before he could enter the Outer Realm. This time, Lin Jin steered the cloud with all his might. Due to his increase in strength, Lin Jin's speed was much faster than the average eagle. Although it still couldn't compare to the golden-winged monster's insane speed, it was still extraordinary. For 2 days and 2 nights, Lin Jin didn't stop for a single moment. Everywhere he looked was desolate. There were only yellow sand and rocks. At first, he could see some trees and grass, but after a day, everything was gray. There was no vegetation at all. It was as if he had entered a land of death. If mortals and beasts entered a place like this, death was certain. They couldn't possibly walk out alive. This area was like a border of death, separating the Outer Realm from the continents of Middle-earth. In other words, even experts with decent cultivation and eagle beasts would face great danger if they tried to cross this area. Strange winds and sandstorms. Just these alone were like an invisible wall, as if this was the end of the world. When Lin Jin saw an endless wall of miasma in the distance, he finally perked up from his dull and numb mood. He finally saw it. Truth be told, Lin Jin had only heard about the Outer Realm. Now that he was seeing it with his own eyes, he was astounded. Who would have thought that this miasma was like a wall that was tens of thousands of feet tall, stretching out for tens of thousands of miles? At this height, Lin Jin couldn't see the end of it. Even after seeing the miasma wall, Lin Jin had to fly over on his cloud for several hours. We finally got closer. Lin Jin was astounded once more. The miasma wall separated the Outer Realm from Middle-earth. In other words, by taking a step forward, one would be entering the Outer Realm. Turning back would bring one back to Middle-earth. Lin Jin knew that most immortals had fallen during the great calamity of immortality. Only a few managed to escape into the miasma wall to avoid the rank 9 immortal devouring beast pursuit. As for why the rank 9 immortal devouring beast wouldn't chase after them, no one knew. But without a doubt, the Outerium was now the immortals' last refuge. They had been hiding here for thousands of years. Besides immortals, due to the harsh environment in the Outerium, even the beasts were more ferocious than the last. Taking a deep breath, Lin Jin stepped into the miasma. The invasion of the miasma wasn't as intense as Lin Jin imagined. Perhaps it was because of the sachet Qin Yinshan gave him, or because Lin Jin had used the Four Seas Freedom Gourd to condense a layer of water vapor to protect himself. Of course, it was also possible that Lin Jin had used the ghost blood beast to strengthen his body. Chapter 6:26. In any case, the miasma was affecting Lin Jin. But from the looks of it, it was negligible, so it wasn't a big deal. This made Lin Jin feel much more at ease. He had been worried that he wouldn't be affected by the miasma due to his lack of an immortal's physique. Now, it seemed like he didn't have to worry about that anymore. And so, Lin Jin stepped into the miasma. Lin Jin turned around to look. Looking out from within the miasma, it was as if he was looking through a special medium to another medium. It was like looking at something in the water. Lin Jin could feel a unique spirit energy here. It was stronger than outside, but it was still far from the extent of spirit energy during the golden age of immortality, as described in some ancient texts. Also, unlike the barren land outside, there was a lot of vegetation here. It felt like he was in a dense forest. What an interesting experience. A few meters behind him was a barren land. But within the miasma, it was like a tropical rainforest with lush vegetation. Lin Jin didn't ride on a cloud because it would be too conspicuous. After walking for a while, Lin Jin suddenly stopped. He was surrounded by towering trees with strange layers of leaves. If there was something hidden in the forest, he wouldn't be able to see it. However, while the vegetation could block his vision, it couldn't block his senses. Lin Jin was especially sensitive to beasts. Since earlier, he had sensed something amiss. The wind carried a fishy stench, and danger lurked everywhere. Suddenly, something strange happened. A shadow suddenly pounced out from the cover of the vegetation, heading straight for Lin Jin. This shadow was huge, and when it opened its mouth, the stench was overwhelming. Lin Jin was already prepared. Before the shadow pounced, he had already flicked his finger. Lin Jin's acupuncture technique was no longer what it used to be. It wouldn't be an exaggeration to say that it had reached perfection. When the shadow opened its mouth, as if struck by lightning, it couldn't move at all. Everything happened in the blink of an eye. At a closer look, Lin Jin realized that the shadow was a large python that could be hugged by a man. This python was completely different from the ones Lin Jin usually saw. This one had grass and flowers growing on its body. If it had been hiding in the forest, it would have been difficult to spot it. Moreover, when the python opened its mouth, it revealed several rows of sharp teeth. There was also a retractable proboscis at its throat that could be ejected to tear its prey apart. Lin Jin had never seen such a vicious and savage beast before. But no matter what, it was still a beast. Lin Jin used the spirit refinement technique to pierce its acupoints. At the same time, he used his beast aura to subdue the anaconda. Grass-skinned ghost python, rank 5. Good at concealment, fond of flesh and blood. Yang loathing fire. The method of advancement is, upon contact, the anaconda's information appeared, and Lin Jin immediately grasped all the information about this foreign beast. To Lin Jin's surprise, this rank 5 anaconda was a female, and it was about to give birth to its young. That was why it needed a lot of food. Moreover, the reproduction rate of this kind of beast was extremely terrifying. It would inject the young python through its mouth into the prey's body, and then the young python would grow rapidly in the prey's body. In other words, this guy just intended to get the young python into his body and then use it as an incubator for the young python. Just thinking about it was enough to know how terrifying that outcome would be. What's the use of keeping a demonic beast like you? Lin Jin looked at this ghost python. Other than being ferocious and terrifying, there was nothing good about it. Moreover, forming a blood pact with it was extremely difficult. Leaving it alive would only bring trouble. Dragon fire. Invoking a spell, Lin Jin opened his mouth and a stream of scorching fire surged out. With a crackling sound, the gigantic rank 5 grass-skin ghost python was instantly burned to ashes. Lin Jin easily destroyed a rank 5 pet beast just like that. This proved that Lin Jin's current strength had reached an incredible level. However, not long after he stepped foot into the foreign territory, he was ambushed by a foreign beast. Lin Jin now understood that this place was much more dangerous than Heartland. He would have to be more careful in his future operations. He couldn't afford to be careless. Lin Jin continued deeper into the foreign territory. Moments later, he turned back to find that the miasma wall was no longer there. All he could see were towering trees ranging from 100 feet to 1,000 feet tall and endless vegetation. Half a day later, Lin Jin arrived at the top of a mountain. The peak wasn't tall, less than half the height of the surrounding trees. However, it was still considered a high ground. Looking down from this height, everything was clear and spacious. The scenery here isn't bad, Lin Jin mumbled to himself. Prior to this, he had assumed that the foreign territory would be desolate and dangerous. But now that he was here, he realized that while it was dangerous, this place wasn't exactly desolate. Putting aside the grassy continent, it was not inferior to the central continent or the southern continent. Other than the miasma, everything here was much larger than the central continent. Larger mountains, larger plants. After all, no one had ever seen a 1,000-foot-tall tree in Heartland. Speaking of which, this tree was a unique species. 10 people couldn't even wrap their arms around its trunk. There was also grass that was taller than humans and mushrooms that looked like roofs. Lin Jin recalled that this place could be described as a land of giants. Everything should be huge. Lin Jin's imagination ran wild. Suddenly, he thought of how the beasts here were all of different sizes. Could there really be giants here? In Lin Jin's vocabulary, it was giant, but in some books, they were referred to as jinns. Jinns were members of the ancient immortal tribe. They were huge to begin with an average height of more than 10 feet. Some were even 3 to 5 feet tall. Just like in some of the books Lin Jin had read, the guardian of the Immortal Palace's Sky Gate was a Jin general. There were many similar legends. Lin Jin guessed that the birthplace of the Jin tribe was most likely in this foreign territory. Just as Lin Jin was thinking about this, he suddenly saw a silhouette moving in the distance. He turned to look. Wow, it's really a Jin. Lin Jin was startled. Just what he was thinking about had come true. About 1,000 meters ahead, a Jin with a sturdy build and skin like a jujube was walking. Every step he took was imposing. In addition, this Jin was clad in armor and held a metal spear in his hand. To Lin Jin, that was no different from a flagpole. Upon seeing the Jin, Lin Jin's first reaction was curiosity. But what surprised Lin Jin even more was yet to come. Behind the Jin was a beast, and it was a bear. It was a gigantic bear. The Jin before him was huge enough, but this bear was twice the size of the Jin. It was like a walking hill. It was just that this scene seemed so harmonious under the huge tree that was hundreds of meters tall. Lin Jin's size, on the other hand, seemed out of place in this foreign territory. Chapter 6:27. As a newcomer, Lin Jin was naturally curious about the giant spirit and bear. Hence, he concealed his aura and followed behind them. Due to their massive size, Lin Jin wouldn't lose sight of them even if he was a little further away. Hence, Lin Jin kept his distance so that he wouldn't be discovered. Along the way, Lin Jin could tell that the giant spirit was very familiar with his surroundings. Lin Jin had long lost his sense of direction. That's weird. Why do I feel like someone's following us? The giant spirit's left gate stabbed his flag-like spear into the soft soil before sitting down to rest. Behind him, the giant bear sat down with a charmingly naive look. After the giant bear sat down, it looked like a small hill. The giant bear was obviously not interested in the giant spirit's words. After it sat down, it looked around and scratched the big tree next to it with its claws. Its sharp claws scraped off the bark, revealing the trunk inside. A few thick worms inside the trunk panicked. It was as if someone had suddenly opened the roof of their house. Anyone would panic if they were in their shoes. Before the fat bugs could escape, the giant bear caught them and stuffed them into its mouth. The giant bear chewed on them with relish. Each bug was as thick as a human's thigh. They weren't small, but to the giant bear, they were nothing more than snacks. Eat, eat. You silly bear, you only know how to eat. Other than your size, you're nothing, the giant spirit said. Although his words were harsh, there was a hint of affection in his tone. The giant bear didn't seem to care. It continued foraging for food, as if saying, "You talk, I'll eat." Right at this moment, a stream of light flashed past, heading straight for the left side of the giant spirit beast. The originally charmingly naive giant bear suddenly acted out of character at this time. It swept its claws, and a series of claw winds tore through the air, making crackling sounds like thunder exploding in the ears. With that, the ray of light was blocked. With a flash, the ray of light transformed into a human figure. He laughed and said, "Leftgate, your silly bear doesn't look very smart usually, but it's amazing when it comes to critical moments. Even with my new supernatural power, I don't dare to fight it head-on." The person who spoke was dressed like a vagrant. He was slovenly and his clothes were patched up. However, his aura was rich and mellow as immortal energy flowed around him. Even someone with poor eyesight could tell that this was an immortal. In addition, there was a sword hanging on this person's back. The body of the sword was overflowing with light and vibrant colors. It had no scabbard and looked as if it had been polished from a piece of yellow crystal. Its texture was extremely unique. When the silly bear saw that it knew this person, it immediately sat down and returned to its original naive appearance. It was as if the ferocious, violent bear was a completely different bear from it. "Lose Cultivator Yellowstone, you're a good person, but you like to joke around. If silly bear can't hold back and injures you next time, I won't care," Leftgate of Giant Spirits said. Loose Cultivator Yellowstone laughed and didn't care at all. Then, his nose twitched as he looked left and right. Then, he said, "Leftgate, you brought someone else?" As he spoke, his gaze shifted to where Lin Jean was hiding 1,000 feet away. Now, Lin Jean knew he had been exposed. After all, he was tailing an immortal, so Lin Jean didn't expect to remain undetected. His plan was to avoid making enemies as much as possible, and instead, he wanted to make more friends and learn more about this foreign land. In the next instant, the yellow crystal longsword on Loose Cultivator Yellowstone's back glowed, and he was already in front of Lin Jean. Lin Jean had witnessed Loose Cultivator Yellowstone's supernatural powers earlier, so he wasn't surprised by the man's teleportation spell. Lin Jean tidied his clothes and raised a hand in salute. The ground shook as Giant Spirits left gate, and the silly bear rushed over. Leftgate of Giant Spirits stared at Lin Jean before scratching his head. "I knew it. It felt like someone was following us. Who are you?" "Lin Jean of Central Continent." Lin Jean was a polite man. Whenever he introduced himself, he would always mention a place. Lin Jean was used to calling it his hometown. Sure enough, both Giant Spirits Leftgate and Loose Cultivator Yellowstone were stunned. "What is this Central Continent?" Leftgate asked immediately. Yellowstone shook his head. "It's an unknown place, but that's not the point. Why did you follow Leftgate all the way here?" Seeing that these two immortals were easy to talk to, Lin Jean didn't hide anything and answered. "Lin Jean has just arrived, and it's his first time encountering a giant spirit. I was curious, so I followed you all the way here. I have no ulterior motives, and I bear no ill will." Usually, most people wouldn't pursue the matter after hearing this. Of course, that didn't rule out the possibility of a conflict breaking out. Still, since Lin Jean dared to follow them, he was confident that even if he couldn't win, he could still escape. Yellowstone glanced at Giant Spirit's left gate, and the latter nodded. "That's true. If he had ulterior motives or carried a murderous aura, I would have sensed it long ago. Same goes for Han Xiao. But while our tribe is rare, it's not uncommon. Could it be that you've been cultivating in seclusion, and this is your first time coming out?" Yellowstone nodded. "That should be the case. He looks like one too." As the two echoed each other, Lin Jean smiled bitterly. But it didn't matter. Letting them think what they thought would save him a lot of trouble. Lin Jin was also sure that neither this giant spirit nor Yellowstone knew about Central Continent. Otherwise, they would have sensed it earlier. What followed was a conversation. Lin Jin was polite. Both Leftgate and Yellowstone were immortals. Be it in age or cultivation, they were above him. As a junior, it was only right for him to show them respect. On the other hand, Zhuo Min and Huang Shi assumed Lin Jin to be a disciple of some immortal sect. Disciples of immortal sects were usually arrogant and rarely treated itinerant immortals with politeness. Because of this, both of them had a good impression of Lin Jin, and after a while, their relationship gradually improved. Fellow Lin, since you're here to gain experience, you should be free and do whatever you want. It just so happens that Zhuo Min and I are going to the legendary spirit pool of the Immortal Queen to take a look. Why don't we go together? Huang Shi Lu's practitioner casually invited. Leftgate nodded in agreement. If there's nothing else, we can take care of each other. After all, it's dangerous to train alone. Lin Jin couldn't be happier. If the two hadn't asked, he would have thought of a way to follow them. But now that they were inviting him, how could he refuse? And so, they hit it off. They were now familiar with each other. Giant Spirit's Leftgate. Despite his name, he didn't have a surname. It was normal for the Giant Spirit tribe to have no surnames. Leftgate was considered an anomaly among the Giant Spirits. Since ancient times, the Giant Spirit tribe had been following immortals and was considered their right-hand man. But Leftgate didn't like it. He preferred to be alone, and he liked to tame beasts. He had raised Han Xiong since he was young. Chapter 628. Lin Jin took this opportunity to appraise Han Xiong. Once he did, he was shocked. Just as he expected, Han Xiong was a rank 6 pet beast. Rank 6 was considered an immortal beast. In addition, Han Xiong had a strong physique and was already 104 years old. Despite its size, it was still considered a child in this foreign land. Having raised Han Xiong for 100 years, Zhuo Min's minds were connected. Although there was no blood contract between them, their bond was deeper than that. As for Yellowstone, he was a famous itinerant immortal nearby. He belonged to no sect and was the servant of a minor immortal during the great calamity of immortality. Later on, he escaped to this foreign land by chance. Back then, he was still young, and after cultivating slowly, he became an immortal. However, immortals were everywhere in this foreign land, so Yellowstone's cultivation level was only so. That yellow crystal sword on his back, however, was extraordinary. It was said that Yellowstone came across this crystal by chance and spent 60 years polishing it into a sword. At the same time, he studied his supernatural powers and gained some fame. His sword shone brightly, and its energy was like a rainbow. Its specialty was its speed. It was like light. However, the sword energy was only average. Just like earlier, it was broken by Han Xiong's claw. It was obvious that its power was limited, but that was only for immortals. Lin Jin was especially envious of Han Xiong after his appraisal. Han Xiong was a rare beast among immortal beasts with great potential for growth. Moreover, after activating its bloodline, it would receive a supernatural power. And that supernatural power was mountain blood. With a single transformation, Han Xiong could grow to the size of a mountain. With that, no matter who the enemy was, Han Xiong could simply slap them and no one would be able to stop him. Even if it was an immortal sect, if Han Xiong was angered, he could grow to the size of a mountain and come and go as he pleased. Any immortal sect would be reduced to a pile of rubble. However, Han Xiong hadn't activated mountain blood yet. Lin Jin went through Han Xiong's evolution and bloodline activation method in his mind and chuckled self-deprecatingly, musing that his occupational habit was acting up again. Seeing a pet beast that he had never seen before made him feel more passionate than seeing a beautiful woman. Along the way, Han Xiong was feeling a little guilty from Lin Jin's gaze. Zhuo Min, Huang Shi, and the others had agreed to meet nearby. Their goal was to go to the spirit pool of the Immortal Empress to take a look. Back then, the Celestial Emperor's glory was boundless. He had many immortal concubines, but the Celestial Empress only had one, and her cultivation had long since reached the carefree immortal realm. This celestial empress had once refined a magic treasure called the Celestial Treasure Spirit Pool. Rumor has it that it is very mysterious. On the way, Huangshi Sanren was showing off his knowledge. Lin Jin listened attentively. He really didn't know about these things before, and it was more believable to hear it from an immortal. On the other hand, the Great Spirit Left sect was very good at undermining the stage. Marvelous? What's so special about it? Zhuo Min asked. Loose cultivator Huangshi was speechless. This I don't know. After all, I haven't seen it with my own eyes. It is said that during the great battle of the Immortal Palace, the Immortal Queen's spiritual pool was also destroyed. A large piece of it fell here. Every 100 years, a pool of spiritual water will be gathered here. Regardless of whether it is for immortals or beasts, it is very beneficial. All right, it is the same for magical treasures. As he spoke, loose cultivator Huangshi caressed the yellow crystal sword on his back with a loving look on his face. It was hard to imagine a man showing such an expression towards a sword. Lin Jin quickly averted his eyes. However, Lin Jin listened to loose cultivator Huangshi's words. Does this mean that the day of the spirit pool's 100 years of water gathering is here again? Lin Jin asked. Ha, brother Lin, you've hit the nail on the head. Yellowstone nodded. That's right. These few days will be the day of the 100 years. That's why, brother Lin, it's better to come at the right time than to come early. Since you're here, let's go together. Forget about bathing in the spirit pool to reap any benefits. We should at least go take a look. Perhaps we might be able to reap some benefits. But on second thought, it made sense. 4 itinerant immortals like Zhuo Min and Yellowstone. Without the protection of a sect, they had to rely on themselves. Indeed, they couldn't let go of any opportunities. Lin Jin could tell that since the Queen of Fairy Spirit Pool only appeared once every 100 years, there must be a lot of immortals eyeing it. Most itinerant immortals went there just to join the fun. They might not be able to reap any benefits. But just as Yellowstone said, if they went, there was still a chance. If they didn't, there would be no chance at all. The Queen of Fairy Spirit Pool is indeed worth a visit, Lin Jin thought. Lin Jin mused. Although Lin Jin's main purpose in coming to the foreign lands was to search for the Nine Suns crystal, he couldn't miss out on other opportunities. According to Yellowstone and the others, since the Queen of Fairy Spirit Pool was beneficial to immortals, immortal beasts, and artifacts, it was definitely worth a visit. Lin Jin took the opportunity to ask Giant Spirits Left Gate in Yellowstone about the Nine Suns crystal to see if they knew anything about it. The results were just as Lin Jin expected. Giant Spirits Left Gate looked confused. After all, he had no idea about a material that could only be refined by a true immortal. To put it bluntly, Zhuo Min was just a foreigner who hadn't seen much of the world. In terms of knowledge, he probably wasn't as knowledgeable as Lin Jin. Yellowstone, on the other hand, was knowledgeable. At the mention of the Nine Suns crystal, he asked, Nine Suns crystal that can only be refined by a fire-tempered immortal? Upon hearing this, Lin Jin nodded. That's right. Does Brother Yellowstone know where I can get it? Yellowstone quickly shook his head. I don't know about that. I only heard it from others. Oh my, a fire-tempered immortal. I wonder if there's still an expert like that around. Lin Jin's heart sank. Just as Qin Yunshang and Chan Xiankong had said, if orthodox disciples like them couldn't get their hands on it, what more an itinerant immortal like Yellowstone? However, I did hear that 2,000 years ago, a fire-tempered, true immortal expert perished. His cosmos ring shattered in the sky, and countless treasures from the ring were scattered in the treasure fall mountain. Perhaps there are Nine Suns crystals among them. However, there are too many ferocious beasts there, let alone loose immortals. Even some experts from immortal sects rarely go there. The advantage of traveling with an itinerant immortal was that he could hear all sorts of strange news. For example, this treasure fall mountain was Lin Jin's first time hearing about it. Qin Yunshang and Qin Xinkong obviously didn't know about it either. However, whether or not Treasure Fall Mountain was as Yellowstone said was a different story. To Lin Jin, it was already a miracle that this rumor had a 20% chance of being true. To put it bluntly, If a fire-tempered immortal's universe ring had really shattered, all sorts of treasures would have been scattered all over the place. How could Lin Jin possibly have a chance? After all, this incident didn't just happen yesterday. Nine Suns crystals weren't easy to obtain, so Lin Jin could only continue asking around and looking for opportunities. As for the Queen of Immortal Spirit Pond, based on what Zhuomin and Yellowstone had said, it was a good idea to check it out. Chapter 629. One was unreachable while the other was close at hand. Lin Jin couldn't let go of the unreachable one, but that didn't stop him from getting what was right in front of him. After making up his mind, Lin Jin expressed his desire to broaden his horizons with Zhuomin and Huangshi. Zhuomin and Huangshi were more than happy to oblige. They hit it off with Lin Jin. Although they hadn't known each other for long, they could already be considered friends. Since they were friends, there was no need to hold back. When we get to the spirit pond later, there might be a fight. It's best if we can avoid it, but we should be prepared, Huangshi said before turning to Han Xiong. Huangshi said, then looked at Han Xiong. Left gate, your Han Xiong is strong and is the strongest among us. However, his only flaw is his gluttony. Last time, when we went to the 3-eye immortal cave for treasures, it was because of his gluttony that we suffered a great loss. This time, we can't repeat the same mistake. Zhuomin nodded at this. Then, he glanced at Han Xiong and shook his head helplessly. Well, I can't do anything about it. It's not just me. Even the silly bear can't control himself. I've tried my best to control the silly bear's size, but the more he grows over the years, the more he eats. Fortunately, there's no shortage of food in the forest, so he won't go hungry no matter what. However, with his size, he has to eat most of the time, or else he'll starve. If the silly bear gets hungry, I'm afraid he won't even be able to use 10% of his usual strength. Having said that, he sighed. Huangshi understood the situation and shook his head helplessly as well. They had studied this matter, but there was no solution. It might seem like a simple matter of eating, but it had stumped the two immortals. As Lin Jin listened on, he began to ponder on the matter. Han Xiong's gluttony was apparent from the Museum of Deadly Beasts appraisal results. Of course, to Lin Jin, it was just a simple problem of eating. But the simpler problem was, the more troublesome it was to solve. This was a rare beast among immortal beasts, and its favorite thing to do was to eat. That was also one of the keys to maintaining its huge size. What the Jinling left gate said sounded absurd, but it was actually the truth. If Han Xiong didn't eat well, his combat strength will be greatly reduced. This was the common trait of a special bear like the silly bear, but at the same time, if its appetite was satisfied, the silly bear's strength would increase exponentially. This kind of constitution, there are good and bad. It all depended on whether he could satisfy it. In Lin Jin's opinion, it would be difficult to satisfy Han Xiong's appetite given the current circumstances. There wasn't enough food around to satisfy Han Xiong's appetite. To put it bluntly, Han Xiong was in a half-starved state most of the time. However, Lin Jin had an idea. He had a feed mill. Truth be told, ever since the Museum of Deadly Beasts feed mill opened, Lin Jin hadn't used it much. Most of the time, he didn't need to use it. But now, against an immortal beast like the silly bear, the fodder workshop's usefulness immediately manifested itself. There was a special type of beast food produced in the feed factory. Its name was beast food. Its function was to satisfy the appetite of wild beasts. In other words, it was something that could fill a beast's stomach. This type of beast food wasn't worth much, so the feed mill could slowly produce different types of beast food at any given time. The most basic type was already piled up in a shocking amount. With a flip of his hand, Lin Jin revealed a few beast food pills. Although they were called pills, they were about the size of a meatball. They were round and swarthy, seemingly inconspicuous. But if one were to take a closer sniff, one would be able to smell a unique aroma. To humans or immortals, this aroma was extremely faint, almost indiscernible. But to beasts or immortal beasts, the aroma would definitely be overwhelming. After all, the food in the feed mill was prepared for beasts and immortal beasts. Sure enough, the moment Lin Jin took out the 3 beast food pills, the silly bear who had been foraging for food immediately turned its gaze over. That pair of silly bear eyes was now staring straight at the beast food in Lin Jin's hand. The aroma was so overwhelming that the silly bear couldn't stop itself. It turned its head towards Lin Jin, its gigantic head as tall as Lin Jin. It couldn't stop its saliva from dripping down like a waterfall. "You want some?" Lin Jin waved the beast food in his hand. The silly bear clearly understood and nodded, as expected of an immortal beast. Even without forming a blood pact, it was still highly intelligent. Jinling, Dreamer, and Yellowstone, who were chatting and walking ahead, noticed what was happening behind them. Turning around, they were stunned. "This is—" "Don't talk. Look at the silly bear. I've never seen it like this before. What is that in Brother Lin's hand? Why is the silly bear looking at it like—" This question wasn't easy to answer. After all, neither Yellowstone nor Jinling Dreamer knew what beast food was. Upon hearing their conversation, Lin Jin answered, "This is a type of beast food I refine myself. Don't underestimate it just because it's small in size. Once a wild beast enters its stomach, it can greatly increase its satiety." Upon hearing this, Jinling Dreamer was pleasantly surprised. "There's such a treasure in this world. Really? This little bit isn't even enough to fill the gaps between the silly bear's teeth." Yellowstone was skeptical. Lin Jin smiled. "If you don't believe me, you can give it a try." "All right." Jinling Dreamer was the first to agree. Truth be told, Jinling Dreamer was anxious to be with the silly bear every day. Just finding food for the silly bear took up a lot of his time. The time spent on cultivation and improving his strength was negligible. However, Jinling Dreamer had no other choice. Now that he had a chance to feed the silly bear, even if it was only a sliver of hope, Jinling Dreamer was willing to give it a try. In his words, the silly bear had been with him for more than 100 years, and it probably hadn't had a full meal. How pitiful! Seeing that Jinling Dreamer had agreed, Lin Jin tossed the 3 pieces of beast food to the silly bear. One was enough for most beasts, and they wouldn't need to eat for at least a day. Not only could this beast food provide satiety, but it was also nutritionally balanced. It was truly good stuff. After all, it was a product of the Museum of Deadly Beasts, so it had a good foundation. Due to the silly bear's massive physique, Lin Jin figured one wouldn't be enough, so just to be safe, he took out 3. In fact, Lin Jin could take out more. Forget 3, he could even take out 3 or even 3,000. However, the rarer something was, the greater its value. If this thing really worked, Lin Jin wouldn't have revealed his trump card. 3 should be enough, Lin Jin estimated. He watched as the silly bear swallowed 3 pieces of beast food in one gulp. Then it chewed and chewed, licking its lips. It was like Zhu Beiji eating ginseng fruit. It didn't taste anything special. But soon, the silly bear's expression changed. Chapter 630. It was hard to imagine that a bear could display so many different expressions in such a short time. At first, it was shock, but soon, it turned into satisfaction. It was the look of someone who had eaten a full meal and sat down comfortably to rest. The main point was satisfaction. Lin Jin didn't feel much about this, and neither did Wander Yellowstone. But Zhuamin, who had spent a lot of time with the bear, was the most shocked. It had been a long, long time since Zhuamin had seen Han Xiong look so satisfied. The last time, it seemed to be 20 years ago, they worked together to lure a nest of soul-severing wasps out of their nest. Then, the silly bear climbed to the top of a tree that was hundreds of feet high and poked down a nest of 3,000 kilograms, eating all the honey inside. It was also that time when Han Xiong had his fill. However, there was a price to pay. Even the thick-skinned Han Xiong was stung by a few requiem wasps until his head was covered in bumps. It was a serious injury. It was obvious that Han Xiong had chosen the first option between having a full stomach and delicious food, as well as being safe. And this time, Han Xiong was satisfied without having to pay such a heavy price. At this sight, Zhuamin was touched and sad at the same time. Burp! Han Xiong let out a loud burp. Zhuamin's fingers were trembling as he saluted Lin Jin with a respectful attitude. "Brother Lin, What kind of treasure did you feed Han Xiong? He saw it clearly. It was 3 pills. He had seen pills before, and as an immortal, he knew a thing or two about pelletization, so he would refine some on a regular basis. Pelletization had a low barrier to entry, but the upper limit was high too. There were pills that weren't worth much, but there were also pills that were worth cities or even priceless treasures. It was because he knew the ropes that Zhuo Min's heart trembled. This was an elixir that could feed the Han Xiong and even fill him up. It was obvious that this was no ordinary elixir. In any case, Zhuo Min, who knew a little about elixirs, was sure that he couldn't refine an elixir of this level. If he could, he would have fed the Han Xiong a long time ago. Because of this, Zhuo Min speculated that these 3 pills might not be priceless, but they were close to it. Lin Daoyu didn't even bat an eyelid as he calmly fed the 3 valuable ammunition to the silly bear. He really owed him a big favor. Because of this, Zhuo Min's hands were shaking. This was not only because he was excited, but also because he was afraid that he would not be able to return the favor. Lin Jin didn't notice Zhuo Min's reaction, nor was he aware of his complicated feelings. At his question, Lin Jin waved his hand nonchalantly. It's not a treasure. I told you, it's just some beast food I refine myself. Since Han Xiong is hungry, let him eat his fill. He had an expression that said, even if it was a treasure, you don't have to care. This confirms Zhuo Min's previous guess, and Zhuo Min was extremely touched. As a giant spirit, it was looked down upon by many immortal sect disciples. After all, giant spirits were slaves of immortals. They had to guard the mountain gate for immortals, and all they had to do was physical labor. To put it bluntly, it was the same as a mule or a horse. Because Zhuo Min didn't like this kind of identity, he left the giant spirit family and wandered alone. He didn't make many friends, but they were all like-minded. Today, Zhuo Min was touched. He now saw Lin Jin as a true friend. Zhuo Min wanted to say more, but Lin Jin stopped him with a wave of his hand. It was just a few pieces of beast food, so Lin Jin didn't think too much of it. This time, he had tested the effectiveness of the beast food, and he was very satisfied with the results. The huge pile of beast food that he thought took up a lot of space was now put to good use. In comparison, Lin Jin was even happier. After all, there was no lack of beasts like Han Xiong in this world who couldn't eat their fill due to their unique physique or overly large size. Seeing Lin Jin's determined attitude, and knowing that the giant spirit wasn't one to be shy, Zhuo Min didn't say anything else, but kept Lin Jin's kindness in mind. Huangshi's impression of Lin Jin rose once again. The trio's relationship took another step forward. Even Han Xiong became closer to Lin Jin. Now, even if Lin Jin ordered him to do something, Han Xiong wouldn't refuse. After another half a day of walking, they arrived at a hillside. Huangshi said, "We're almost there. Lotus Valley is just ahead, and the Queen of Immortality's spiritual pond is here." Lin Jin could clearly feel Huangshi, Zhuo Min, and Zhuo Min perk up. From now on, they might run into other people who were eyeing the Queen of Immortality's spiritual pond. This meant that a fight might break out. In short, there was no harm in being cautious. Just as the trio entered Lotus Valley, Han Xiong's ears twitched, and he looked up at the sky. Almost at the same time, Lin Jin, Zhuo Min, and Huangshi sensed it. "Watch out," Huangshi warned. The next instant, the topaz sword hanging on his back flew out, emitting a yellow glow as it slashed upwards. There was a loud rumble. A gigantic palm print was slashed apart by Huangshi and the other two swords. However, the gust of wind brought along by the palm print left a large palm-shaped mark on the ground. Including Lin Jin, Zhuo Min, and Huangshi suffered a small loss. Another person landed in front of them. He was dressed in a long robe and exuded a rich aura. His physique was sturdy and his palms glowed with a faint light. His appearance was decent, but the hooks under his high-nose bridge gave him a sinister air. Divine Palm, Immortal Chiobin, to think that you're so shameless in your actions and love to ambush others. Could it be that you're still holding a grudge against me for losing to you the last time? Huangshi rebuked the immortal in front of him. Clearly, they knew each other. Not only did they know each other, but they also had a grudge against each other. Divine Palm, immortal Xiaobin sneered. Ambush. I'm just testing your skills. Huangshi, why do you have to be so serious? I knew you wouldn't be absent from the reopening of the Queen of Immortality's spiritual pond. 10 years ago, we had a match and I was slightly inferior to you. But 10 years later, it's time for me to teach you a lesson. Sure enough, there was a grudge between them. And by the looks of it, the grudge ran deep. Lin Jin believed that Xiaobin's palm strike was a casual one. But it was an immortal's technique after all. A casual strike could be so powerful that it would be difficult for Lin Jin to neutralize it on his own. This made Lin Jin realize that this was an extremely dangerous place. Fortunately, he met his two friends, Zhuamin and Huangshi. Otherwise, if Lin Jin were to encounter an immortal-level foe on his own, it would be troublesome to deal with them. However, he couldn't hide now. Divine Palm, immortal Xiaobin's strength was on par with Huangshi's. He was stronger than Zhuamin, but not as strong as Han Xiong. With Lin Jin's help, there shouldn't be any problems. However, Xiaobin might not be alone. Lin Jin noticed two people standing not far behind Divine Palm, immortal Xiaobin. Chapter 631. The two people were a man and a woman. They were wearing similar clothes. The man was tall and had long limbs. He held a sickle that looked like it was used to mow grass. As for the woman, she held a strange flute. The flute was completely made of white bones. There was a black rope tied to the end of the flute. Behind the black rope, there was a string of strange bones that were strangely shaped. It was hard to tell whether they belonged to a human or a beast. This man and woman were obviously Xiaobin's companions. Lin Jin had no doubt that if a fight were to break out, these two would definitely step forward to help Xiaobin. It was the same on Lin Jin's side as well. Jinling's left gate seemed to be gripping his iron spear tightly as his aura tensed up, ready to charge at any moment. Lin Jin had always been a good judge of character. Simply put, if there were more than one enemy, Lin Jin could usually pick out the most dangerous one. His gaze swept across the man and woman before finally stopping on the woman. Danger. This wasn't just his intuition. Lin Jin could also sense a unique murderous aura emanating from this woman. She wasn't a woman, but a fairy. However, she wasn't dressed in fluttering fairy robes. Instead, she was dressed in an extremely odd manner. She looked like a barbarian of the shaman tribe. Clad in animal skin, her limbs and a large portion of her skin were exposed, giving her a sturdy bronze hue. She was also adorned with animal fangs and bones, giving her a wild and unrestrained appearance. Lin Jin couldn't see her face clearly because she was wearing a cow horn mask. Half of her face was hidden under the cow's bones. Lin Jin looked at her colleague. A pair of glints flashed beneath the cow's bones as she turned to look at Lin Jin. As their eyes met, both Lin Jin and the barbarian were stunned. Lin Jin was drenched in sweat. What a strong telekinesis! Lin Jin mumbled to himself. Ever since he obtained the Museum of Deadly Beasts, his telekinesis had far surpassed that of others. No matter who he met after that, none of them could compare to Lin Jin in terms of telekinesis. After all, he usually relied on his telekinesis to search the museum. As the saying went, eyes were the windows to one's telekinesis. When Lin Jin and the barbarian exchanged glances earlier, the other party's telekinesis immediately rushed over. Fortunately, Lin Jin wasn't weak. Otherwise, he might have fainted or worse. His mind might have been torn apart. Simultaneously, a figure appeared before Lin Jin. It was none other than Han Xiong. Besides Han Xiong, Dungling's left disciple also pulled Lin Jin aside and asked anxiously, "Brother Lin, are you all right?" Lin Jin calmed himself down and shook his head. "I'm fine. Are you sure?" Giant Spirit's left disciple was still looking anxious as he scrutinized Lin Jin from head to toe. This surprised Lin Jin, but after giving it some thought, Lin Jin realized that Giant Spirit's left disciple must know about that barbarian's tricks. Sure enough, that was the case. The other party came too quickly just now. I didn't have time to tell you. It was also my negligence. The left gate of the giant spirit sect had a look of relief on his face. That woman is a member of the Witch Immortal tribe. During the ancient War of Immortals, the Witch Immortal tribe was defeated by the Immortal tribe. Ever since then, their numbers plummeted and they even went extinct. Later on, during the Great Calamity of Immortality, traces of Witch Immortals were discovered in this foreign land. Although there aren't many of them, they're still a force to be reckoned with. This barbarian woman is known as the Ghost-Eye Granny. Her supernatural power lies in her pair of demonic eyes. You mustn't look her in the eye. I was distracted by Chiobin just now, so I forgot to warn you about this. Fortunately, that barbarian woman didn't go too hard on you. Otherwise, Brother Lin would have been in deep trouble. Lingering fear was written all over Zhuangmin's face. He thought Lin Jin was lucky that the barbarian woman didn't go too hard on him. However, only Lin Jin knew that wasn't the case. When he and the barbarian woman exchanged glances earlier, he immediately felt as if the world was collapsing. In that instant, it felt like a year had passed. Had it been someone with a weak mind, they would have broken down by now. Fortunately, Lin Jin's mind was strong enough to withstand the attack. In other words, the barbarian woman hadn't been merciful. It was Lin Jin's resistance. Otherwise, Lin Jin would have been dead by now. Lin Jin didn't elaborate on the specifics. After all, there was no need to complicate matters. The name Ghost-Eye Granny sounded scary, and her supernatural power was terrifying, but as long as one didn't look in her eyes, they would be fine. What Lin Jin was more concerned about was the bone flute in the Ghost-Eye Granny's hand. The danger level of that thing was definitely not low. Taking a deep breath, Lin Jin steadied his psyche. Come to think of it, it was odd that a cold breeze would occasionally blow through the museum. Previously, Lin Jin's psyche felt as if it was being roasted over a fire, restless and unable to calm down. But now, under the influence of this refreshing breeze, his psyche quickly calmed down. Needless to say, this must be another supernatural power of the Museum of Deadly Beasts. It could stabilize one's mind. This was an accidental discovery. Moreover, the Museum of Deadly Beasts' ability to restore one's mind was definitely a bug. Lin Jin couldn't find any item or spell that could restore one's mind from the books he had read. He could only slowly cultivate it or seek help from a senior with a higher cultivation level. But even so, the process was slow. No one could restore one's mind as quickly as the Museum of Deadly Beasts. In any case, Lin Jin had never heard of it. This was interesting. Lin Jin was now like a child who had just found a new toy. His heart was filled with the desire to explore the unknown. When he exchanged glances with the Ghost-Eye Granny earlier, Lin Jin recalled that he seemed to have experienced an earth-shattering event. Then, endless lava surged out from beneath his feet, burning him. When Lin Jin's mind was attacked, he was so dizzy that he couldn't react in time. Now that he thought about it, the Ghost-Eye Granny was indeed impressive. Now, Lin Jin's mind began to spin. He thought of an interesting idea, and that was to test the Museum of Deadly Beast Protection and Restoration of one's mind. This was important. After all, if he could confirm this, Lin Jin would have a way to deal with immortals like the Ghost-Eye Granny in the future. At this, Lin Jin boldly looked at the Ghost-Eye Granny again. Again? Do you want to die? From afar, the Ghost-Eye Granny had been watching Lin Jin. After all, she hadn't used her full strength earlier and had only used a burning spell to teach Lin Jin a lesson because he dared to look her in the eye. This made the Ghost-Eye Granny feel challenged. So, it was necessary to retaliate forcefully. Of course, this was just a small punishment. Having his mind burned must have been excruciating. Lin Jin must have learned his lesson and learned not to look at her like a hothead next time. Is the great Ghost-Eye Granny someone you can look at? Who would have thought that after a short while, the kid would look at her again? This obviously upset the Ghost-Eye Granny. She mused that she had been too merciful earlier. She should have used a more powerful spell to teach this ungrateful guy a lesson. Do you still dare to look me in the eye? Ghost-Eye Granny's eyes shone with a ghastly glow once more. But this time around, The hidden flames were no longer present. Instead, they were replaced with the sharpness of an axe. What surprised the ghost-eyed granny was that Lin Jean actually dared to look her in the eye again. Chapter 632. You only know how to eat, but not how to fight. Furious, Ghost-Eye Matron cast another spell without hesitation. But this time, she didn't use flames. Instead, she used a blade. This blade witchcraft was of a higher level than the previous one. Of course, it was more lethal too. The previous Scorch spell was only meant to injure, but this blade witchcraft was meant to kill. She knew that Ghost-Eye Matron shouldn't look at her, but she was still staring right at her. If she didn't retaliate against such a provocation, where would she put her dignity? Both parties stared at each other. Lin Jean had fallen for it in a daze last time. After all, he wasn't on guard and hadn't experienced it firsthand. Who would have thought that someone could cast spells with their gaze? And this time, Lin Jean took the initiative to go up to them. He was fully prepared. In an instant, Lin Jean felt as if he was immersed in endless darkness. Then, a sharp aura assaulted him, and he felt excruciating pain. It was as if a sharp sword was slashing at his body. Lin Jean knew that Ghost-Eye Matron's spell had injured his psyche. Amazing. Although Lin Jean was in pain, he focused his mind to its limit. Oddly enough, even though he felt the world spinning around him, his mind was clear and his spirit was unextinguished. Lin Jean could sense every single attack from his opponent clearly. With this, Lin Jean could clearly see how Ghost-Eye Matron used her psyche to hurt him. However, the surrounding darkness still hindered his psyche's vision. Not enough. Lin Jean had been slashed 7 to 8 times and was probably at his limit. Lin Jean quickly retracted his psyche. This was a tactical retreat for Lin Jean, but to Ghost-Eye Matron, he was running away. I can't believe he can withstand so many attacks. But even if he doesn't die immediately, he'll need at least 20 to 30 years to recover from the injuries inflicted on his divine sense. In fact, he might even fall ill and die when he gets back. The ghost-eyed old woman laughed coldly. Her laughter was filled with the arrogance of someone who did not know what was good for him. It was as if she was saying, "Provoke me? You deserve to die." With his psyche injured, Lin Jean couldn't help but take a step back. Dangling Zuman was scared out of his wits. Even Wanderer Yellowstone, who was facing off against Xiao Bin, quickly retreated to check on Lin Jean. Fellow Taoist Lin, didn't I just tell you not to look the Ghost-Eye Matron in the eye? If you want to deal with her, you can't look her in the eye. This is the rule. The left gate of the giant spirit was anxious. The Han Bear also came over, anxious but helpless. Knowing that Lin Jean had fallen in a Ghost-Eye Hag's trap, Yellowstone paled in fright. This is bad. That Ghost-Eye Hag is extremely sinister. Barbarian immortals should try their best not to provoke her, but now that he's fallen in her trap, I'm afraid Mr. Lin's life is in danger. Let's bring him to a safe place and think of a way to stabilize his psyche. When he heard that this was Lin Jin's second time getting hit, Yellowstone was stunned. It was understandable that he had fallen for the trap the first time. Furthermore, according to the left sect master, the ghost-eyed granny had been merciful the last time, so fellow Taoist Lin's spiritual will wasn't severely injured. But what was going on the second time? While the ghost-eyed granny was sinister, as long as one didn't look at her, there would be no problem. If one couldn't afford to offend her, one could hide from her. Why would fellow Taoist Lin make the same mistake twice? Fellow Taoist Lin is seriously injured this time. I'm afraid he's in trouble. The left sect master looked sorrowful. Lu's cultivator Huangshi was sighing as well. Just then, Lin Jean, who had his eyes closed, suddenly lifted his head and opened his eyes. As if nothing had happened, the left sect master and Yellowstone were dumbfounded. All sorts of thoughts ran through their minds. They weren't the only one surprised. Ghost-Eye Matron, her male barbarian immortal, and Divine Palm immortal Xiao Bin were equally stunned. What's going on? Ghost-Eye Matron, why did you have to be merciful to that person? Do you know him? Divine Palm immortal Xiao Bin asked Ghost-Eye Matron as he looked at a tree nearby. He had no choice. He was afraid of getting hit too. Although the male barbarian immortal who was standing next to Ghost-Eye Matron didn't say a word, He looked surprised too, probably thinking the same thing as Chiobin. You knew him, so you were merciful. Ghost Eye Matron was enraged. She had gone all out with her sword and blade witchcraft earlier. Logically speaking, no immortal could have withstood it. Even if their psyche was strong enough to survive, they would still be gravely injured. After all, in this world, while there were medicines that could nourish the physical body, it was rare to find one that could heal one's psyche. Even if there were, it was impossible to recover so quickly. This was simply an ancient mystery, an unsolved riddle. Ghost Eye Matron didn't know how to explain, so she decided not to. This was in line with Ghost Eye Matron's personality. Those who were familiar with her would know that Ghost Eye Matron had always done things her own way. She wouldn't care about anyone else. Not even Divine Palm, Immortal Chiobin. Not even the male barbarian, Immortal, standing next to her. Lin Jin cupped his hands in thanks for Zwum Min and Yellowstone's concern. When Lin Jin was hit by the barbarian Immortal's eye skill, his psyche was injured by a sword, and it was excruciatingly painful. But soon, a gust of cool breeze blew over from the Museum of Deadly Beasts, dispelling the pain and rapidly mending Lin Jin's psyche. Soon, his psyche was restored to its original state. Lin Jin was overjoyed. Chapter 633. On the other side, Huangshi immediately looked at his feet while Zwum Min turned around. Since Han Xiong wasn't affected by the psyche attack, he didn't dodge. On the other hand, Lin Jin was staring straight at Ghost Eye Granny. His carefree and fearless demeanor was admirable. Zwum Min wanted to say something, but was stopped by Huangshi. Don't panic. Since Brother Lin is doing this on purpose, he must have his reasons. Think about it. Wasn't Brother Lin unharmed earlier? Although Huangshi refused to believe that anyone in this world could completely ignore Ghost Eye Granny's spell, Lin Jin might have a way to counter it. After all, facts spoke louder than words. Lin Jin had indeed neutralized Ghost Eye Granny's spell twice. They only assumed that Lin Jin had neutralized it. Little did they know that Lin Jin was only resisting the attack with the protection of the museum psyche. Truth be told, Lin Jin was extremely nervous. After all, judging from Ghost Eye Granny's actions this time, the spell she used must be extremely terrifying. Otherwise, the others wouldn't have reacted the way they did. However, despite his nervousness, Lin Jin was filled with anticipation. He wanted to see how well the museum could protect his psyche. In addition, during the second time his psyche was slashed, Lin Jin managed to figure out his opponent's technique despite the pain. At that moment, Lin Jin even felt like, I can do it too. As for whether it was an illusion or not, Lin Jin didn't know. Hence, he decided to test it out. Using this chance, Lin Jin planned to use the old man's method to teach her a lesson. Lin Jin didn't know if it would work, but there was no harm in trying. What if it worked? In the blink of an eye, Lin Jin and Ghost Eye Granny's eyes met again. In an instant, Lin Jin felt like he was trapped in an endless pitch-black space. He couldn't even feel his own body or anything else. Amazing, Lin Jin thought. He remembered that the immortal barbarian had mentioned that Ghost Eye Granny's technique was called soul capture. Now that he thought about it, it was probably a technique used to instantly kill an enemy. And this killing technique probably involved completely stripping the opponent's psyche and physical body and taking them away. Indeed, this move of the Ghost Eye Granny's was definitely a sure kill technique. If she encountered an even more powerful opponent, she could easily lose her life if she was the slightest bit careless. Before Lin Jin could panic, a door appeared in the darkness behind him. The iron door of the visitation hall was also known as the curator's door. Lin Jin took a step back and his psyche returned to his body. At this moment, Lin Jin also saw a figure hidden in the darkness. If he wasn't mistaken, it was the ghost-eyed Granny's divine will. Lin Jin immediately grabbed the opportunity and pressed his hand on the Qingfeng demon sword. Borrowing the sword intent, he slashed out with his divine will sword intent. To Lin Jin's surprise, A beam of sword light flashed past like a bolt of lightning, instantly slicing through the darkness and illuminating the pitch-black world as bright as day. At that instant, Lin Jin thought he heard the shadow let out a cry of pain and shock. He couldn't hear what came after because the mental realm shattered almost at the same time. Lin Jin came back to his senses. He was still standing where he was, no longer injured. Instead, Lin Jin looked like nothing had happened to him. On the other hand, the ghost-eyed granny's body swayed, and she almost fell to the ground. If it weren't for the male barbarian immortal's quick reflexes, she would have fallen to the ground. In an instant, both parties fell silent. Their eyes were wide open, clearly at a loss for what to do. Logically speaking, the one who should have fallen to the ground should be Lin Jin and not the ghost-eyed granny. But reality was just that absurd. He's a true immortal. Run. Before she fainted, the ghost-eyed granny struggled to say these words before losing consciousness. At this, the male barbarian immortal shuddered. A true immortal. That was a true expert. After all, this was no longer the golden age of immortals, where true immortals could be found everywhere. Other than a few large immortal sects, it was rare to see a true immortal expert, let alone a free immortal. Some people said that free immortals no longer existed in this world. Hence, a true immortal expert was enough to intimidate others. Upon hearing the word true immortal, the male barbarian immortal picked up the unconscious ghost-eyed granny and left without another word. Before Divine Palm immortal Chio Bin could react, the male barbarian immortal had already disappeared. Chiobin was also a powerful person. Although he did not believe that there was a true immortal here, whether it was or not, his two helpers had already left. He was left alone, and it was not wise to stay here. Hence, Chiobin fled. Yellowstone didn't give chase. After all, he and Dengling had to stay here to check on Lin Jin. Yellowstone had heard of the soul capture spell that ghost-eyed granny used earlier. It was a sure kill spell. If someone stared in her eyes and got hit by this spell, there was only one word to describe their fate: death. It was said that the ghost-eyed granny had only used this spell a few times. Yellowstone only knew of 3 times. However, all 3 times, the victims were top-notch experts, and none of them could withstand it. But who would have thought that the ghost-eyed granny would be defeated by Lin Jin? Yellowstone was currently in shock. He couldn't figure it out. Could it really be as ghost-eyed granny said when she fainted? That Lin Jin was a true immortal expert who pretended to be weak? Hesitantly, Yellowstone studied Lin Jin from head to toe, unable to come to a decision. He didn't know what to say either. Dungling's left disciple was shocked too. After a moment of silence, he asked, "Brother Lin, are you all right?" Lin Jin smiled. "I'm fine. I didn't expect to meet a psychic expert like the ghost-eyed granny either. But she picked the wrong opponent. I'm untalented, but I've learned a spell to protect one's psyche from my master. It wasn't of much use before, but I didn't expect it to come in handy now." A spell to protect one's psyche? Yellowstone and Dengling exchanged glances, understanding dawning on them. That made sense. Lin Jin was definitely not a true immortal. After all, the number of true immortals could be counted on one's fingers. They had heard of many of them and knew them like the back of their hands. That was unlikely. In that case, a spell to protect one's psyche was highly plausible. This meant that Lin Jin now had a trump card that specialized in local spells. However, this could only explain why Lin Jin was able to defend against Ghost-Eyed Granny's witchcraft attack. In that case, why was Ghost-Eyed Granny so severely injured that she even fainted? Could it be because of Ghost-Eyed Granny herself? Dungling's left disciple's imagination ran wild as he offered his own hypothesis. Upon hearing this, Yellowstone pondered for a moment before his eyes lit up. Now that you mention it, that might actually be possible. Yellowstone wasn't basking in his imagination. He had his reasons. Many independent immortals had studied this terrifying barbarian immortal, Ghost-Eyed Granny. Not only did they study Ghost-Eyed Granny herself, but they also studied her spells. To put it simply, Ghost-Eye Matron's spell was unreasonably powerful, but according to the laws of spell arts, the more powerful a spell was, the greater its weakness and shortcoming. Perhaps Ghost Eye Matron's shortcoming was that she would suffer a backlash if she failed. Chapter 634. Yellowstone discussed his conclusion with Zhuomin, and both of them agreed. Lin Jin was dumbfounded as he watched from the side. But this was good too. Lin Jin didn't have to explain himself. After all, Lin Jin hadn't fully understood the situation yet. Back when he wanted to retaliate against the shadow, Lin Jin had wanted to see if he could borrow the breezy monster's sword intent. Who knew he would actually succeed? Spells that were similar to witchcraft were also a field that Lin Jin had never stepped foot into. It wasn't appropriate for him to discuss it now. If he made a mistake, he would become a laughingstock. In Yellowstone and Zhuomin's eyes, Lin Jin was only able to survive this ordeal because of luck. Of course, they knew that Lin Jin had a secret method to protect his psyche. But since it was a secret, they wouldn't ask about it. In the cultivation world, even fathers and brothers shouldn't ask about each other's spells. This was the rule. Then, Yellowstone talked about his grudge with Divine Palm, Immortal Qiu Bin. They used to be old acquaintances, but after Qiu Bin ambushed Yellowstone during a treasure hunt, they became enemies. Of course, Yellowstone didn't want to talk about the past. He only told Lin Jin that Divine Palm, Immortal Qiu Bin was an extreme person who would seek revenge for the smallest grievance. It's time. Let's hurry into the valley. The spirit pond might be open by now. Having said that, the three of them entered the valley together. After traversing through the dense forest for a while, they arrived at a spacious area. The plants here were even more unique. They were all species with abundant spirit energy. Lin Jin could even see floating spores that glistened in the air. It was a dreamy place. Lin Jin didn't pay too much attention to the scenery, because what caught his attention was a large piece of white jade before him. The jade piece was huge, over 1,000 feet long. It was curved and sunken, like a piece of a broken bowl. Half of it was buried deep in the ground, and the other half was exposed. If one didn't look closely, it would look like a white jade mountain standing there. Around the jade piece were depressions of varying depths. There was a faint layer of water vapor lingering in the air. It was a mystical sight. There were already many people around them in groups of 3 to 5. These were immortals like them. They were here for the spirit pond's opening, so they came in search of treasures. Some were independent cultivators, while others were disciples of immortal sections. Lin Jin scanned the area. At a glance, there were at least 50 to 60 immortals. There were even some monsters with strong demonic auras among them. However, to Lin Jin, they were just immortal beasts that could transform. Just then, Lin Jin saw someone in the distance. It was Divine Palm Immortal Qiu Bin whom he met earlier. However, Ghost Eye Granny and the other male immortal were nowhere to be seen. Qiu Bin and Lin Jin exchanged glances, but were so frightened that they immediately averted their gazes. Clearly, the previous incident had frightened Qiu Bin. However, the other party coveted the benefits of the spirit pool of the immortal queens and was not willing to leave just like that. Huangshi also saw Qiu Bin. He glared at him, but didn't pay much attention to him. Right now, everyone was waiting for the spirit water to gather in the spirit pool. Before that, no one would jump out to cause trouble. If they did, they would definitely become the target of everyone. Our luck is pretty good. The spiritual water in the spiritual pond has yet to gather, Loose Cultivator Yellowstone said. Using this opportunity, Lin Jin learned that the so-called spirit pool of the Queen of Immortals wasn't actually a pool of water. In other words, the pit below was just a decoration. The so-called spirit pool is the gathering of spiritual water. Spiritual water is the result of an immortal spell, so it's obviously ethereal like an immortal. It's all suspended in the air. Once the spiritual water has gathered, everyone can use their abilities to obtain it, Loose Cultivator Yellowstone explained. Lin Jin finally understood. The spirit pool was suspended in water. Lin Jin hadn't been here for long, so he wasn't familiar with everything here. If he hadn't met Zhuomin and Loose Cultivator Yellowstone, he would probably still be wandering in the forest or fighting with native beasts. Now that he had the opportunity to participate in an immortal-level gathering, strictly speaking, it was a huge step forward for Lin Jin's cultivation. As for how he was going to obtain the spiritual water later, Lin Jin didn't ask. What if loose cultivator Yellowstone and the others didn't know? At this moment, more and more water vapor was gathering at the bottom of the huge white jade piece. Even the water vapor in the middle was gathering more and more. If one looked closely, they could even see some small fish formed from water vapor swimming around the white jade piece. Amazing indeed. Lin Jin was a little nervous, so were loose cultivator Yellowstone and Zhuimin. On the other hand, Han Xiong wasn't interested in this, so he just sat there and looked around. There were other immortal beasts here, but none of them were as big as him. Han Xiong was the biggest. At that moment, the water vapor around the white jade piece increased until it was so dense that it looked like it could turn into liquid at any moment. Just then, an immortal dressed in a long robe suddenly floated up and saluted the others. Dear immortals, I am Du Li Feng from the Immortal Physician sect. Today's reopening of the Immortal Mother Spirit Pool is considered a rare event in the immortal realm. When the Spirit Pool appears later, please use your abilities to obtain the spiritual water. Don't get into a fight because of this, and don't use your strength to bully the weak or rob others of their opportunities. After all, it hasn't been easy for us to recuperate since the Great Calamity. If we start a fight again, I'm afraid this final resting place will be gone. Immortal Du's voice carried a spell as it reverberated through the air. His tone sounded like he was preaching. Everyone here was a free-spirited itinerant immortal. Under normal circumstances, no one would dare to piss on this old man's words. But strangely enough, no immortal raised any objections. Noticing Lin Jin's surprise, Yellowstone whispered, "This old immortal Du has quite a reputation, and he's the sect leader of the Immortal Physician sect. Although he's only a pseudo-immortal, a starving camel is still bigger than a horse. The Immortal Physician sect specializes in healing immortals, so who can guarantee that they won't get sick? After all, it's common for cultivation to go awry. When that happens, we'll have to count on the Immortal Physician sect. Hence, whether it's the sect's disciples or the itinerant immortals outside, everyone has to show this old immortal Du some respect." Lin Jin was enlightened. Just then, another immortal floated out from the crowd and said in a clear voice, "Old immortal Du is right. Our 5 elements immortal sect agrees. When we obtain the spiritual water later, everyone will rely on their own abilities. If anyone tries to snatch it, they'll be going against everyone else." Lin Jin understood now. This was what it meant to set the rules first. After all, there were too many wolves for too little meat. If a few people were to fight because of jealousy, it would surely turn into a chaotic battle. Who knows, they might even lose everything. Hence, no one was willing to see such a scene. Those with greater influence would obviously set the rules. As long as the majority agreed, the minority wouldn't dare to act recklessly. "Our Cloud Path sect agrees too," a female immortal said solemnly. "Xian Dao sect has no objections either," a middle-aged man in a green robe said. At the mention of the Cloud Path sect and Xian Dao sect, Lin Jin immediately looked over. After all, disciples from these 2 immortal sects were among his guests. Chapter 635. However, Lin Jin didn't see Qin Yunshang or Qin Xiankong. He guessed they were still in their respective sections. At this moment, Huang Shi whispered, "That's strange. I heard that there was a powerful celestial beast blocking the entrance of the Xian Dao sect. The Xian Dao sect's celestials can't come out. I haven't heard of any celestials from the Xian Dao sect in many years. Why did they come out today? Could they have gotten rid of that immortal beast blocking the entrance?" These words were spoken in hushed tones, as if it was a private discussion. Giant Spirit sect's disciple shook his head, indicating that he didn't know anything. Lin Jin didn't say a word. He knew that Xian Dao sect must have used his method to chase away the rank 7 black mountain honey badger. From the looks of it, his method must have worked, but there was no need to tell anyone else about this. Most of the itinerant immortals followed the rules, and no one wanted to be enemies with the immortals from the sections. They had already said that when the spirit pool appeared, everyone would try their best to obtain it. It all depended on who had a higher cultivation level and who was more capable. Brother Lin, do you have a suitable container for the spirit pool's water later? Yellowstone suddenly asked. Lin Jin thought about it and patted the Four Seas Freedom Gourd at his waist. I'll just use this gourd to obtain some spirit water. Lin Jin was confident in his Four Seas Freedom Gourd. However, Giant Spirit Sect's disciple quickly said, Brother Lin, it's not easy to obtain the spirit pool's water. I've been here 3 times, and I've only managed to obtain a ladle of water once. That was already a stroke of luck, and the ladle I use is a powerful artifact. That's right. Obtaining the spirit pool's water requires both luck and strength. I've been here 4 times, and I've failed 3 times. As Yellowstone spoke, he took out a cowhide water pouch from his waist. It was obvious that this was a powerful artifact. Lin Jin only realized how difficult it was to obtain water after hearing this. Simply put, the spirit pool's water was ethereal water that was extremely difficult to obtain. Sometimes it was as light as a feather and sometimes as heavy as a mountain rock. Because the water was sentient, it would even resist. Also, the spirit pool's water only appeared for a short period of time. Hence, in the past few times, the better ones only managed to obtain a large vat of water. A large vat? Just then, Lin Jin noticed a Buddha. This Buddha was rather plump and dressed in plain clothes. His chest was exposed, and he wore large prayer beads. His eyebrows were so long that they reached Lin Jin's chest. He had a benevolent look on his face, and most importantly, there was a large vat in front of him. It was half a person tall and made of bronze. There was a trace of celestial, spiritual energy on it. It was clearly a powerful magic treasure. Fellow Taoist Lin has good eyesight. That's Buddhist immortal fairy, an extremely famous individual among the loose immortals. His cultivation is rather high, and the person who drew the most water from the immortal queen spirit pool was him. That water jar in front of him is called the Aqua Water Treasure Jar, and it's very mysterious. Every time, it can fill up a jar of spirit pool water. There was a hint of envy in Huang Shi's voice. It was also said that the water of the spirit pool had endless uses for cultivation, alchemy, artifact forging, and nourishing immortal beasts. It was at this moment that the extremely dense water vapor began to condense into liquid. The immortals all perked up upon seeing this. It was about to begin. They immediately took out their magic treasures to collect water. Some of them were small bottles, some were bowls, some looked like the water ladle in Zhuomen's hands, and a large water vat used by Buddhist immortal fairy. In short, they unleashed their supernatural powers. Seeing this, Lin Jin quickly took out his Four Seas Freedom Gourd. Once the water vapor condensed into a large, floating ring of water, the immortals made their move. Lin Jin quickly invoked a spell to activate the Four Seas Freedom Gourd to absorb the spirit pool's water. At this moment, the struggle between the various parties began. Through various means, the spirit pool's water began to transform into various forms of fish and prawns. They dodged here and there, trying their best to evade the immortals' attempts to absorb the water. This was already difficult enough. Trying to grab hold of this slippery spirit pool's water wasn't an easy task. Even if they managed to obtain it, they would still need to wrestle with others. For example, there is a huge carp formed from the water of a spiritual pool. An immortal used a jade bottle to lure it over, but halfway through, another immortal intercepted it with magic power. The former was naturally unwilling, so the two of them wrestled. They were competing in spells and magical treasures. Whoever couldn't hold on would have to give up. When that happened, the winner would be able to absorb the carp transformed from the spirit pool's water. From a certain perspective, although there wasn't any killing going on here, the competition wasn't weak at all. In fact, it was even more intense. However, there was one thing to be aware of. If one lost in a duel, they mustn't resort to violence. After all, the rules had been set. If one couldn't obtain the water, they could only blame themselves for being inferior. Zhuomin and Huang Shi worked together, trying their best to absorb the spirit pool's water. However, although there was a lot of spirit pool's water, it was divided into different grades. Some could transform into flying cranes and flood dragons, so it was obviously premium spirit water. This was extremely difficult to obtain, and even some of the experts here couldn't do anything about it. Hence, they could only turn their attention to the intermediate and inferior grade spirit water. Even so, it was still difficult. Lin Jin invoked a spell, and the four seas freedom gourd by his waist floated up, hovering in front of him. The gourd's mouth opened wide, and a powerful suction force gushed out. At that moment, the spiritual creatures that were formed by the spirit pool water around the white jade piece trembled in unison. Then, a scene that left everyone dumbfounded happened. These spirit creatures that had transformed from the spirit pond water actually changed directions and flew toward the four seas freedom gourd suction force. The situation was difficult to deal with. Even the spirit pond water that was about to be sucked into the Dharma treasures by the other immortals seemed to be attracted by something. It struggled to break free from the suction force of the Dharma treasures and began to fly toward the four seas freedom gourd. It looked as if it were eager to give it a try, unwilling to fall behind. This scene made many immortals' jaws drop. They rubbed their eyes carefully as if what they just saw was an illusion. But it wasn't an illusion. Almost all of the spirit pool's water was flying toward the four seas freedom gourd. Some immortals tried to stop them midway and absorb the water, but failed. Among them was Buddha Water Fairy. The fat on this Buddha's face was jiggling as he slapped the water jar, creating a buzzing sound. At the same time, he gathered his mana in an attempt to turn the situation around. But it was no use. The spirit pool's water that was about to be absorbed by him turned around and flew away from him. Buddha Water Fairy was anxious and angry, but there was nothing he could do. The entire process happened very quickly. In just a few breaths' time, almost all of the spirit pool's water was sucked into the four seas freedom gourd, vanishing without a trace. After absorbing the spirit pool's water, the four seas freedom gourd's lid closed automatically and floated back to Lin Jin's waist. Silence filled the place. Everyone turned to Lin Jin, including Zhuomin and Huang Shi. It was as if they had just seen a ghost. Lin Jin was shocked too. He looked around and realized that if he didn't say something, things might get out of hand. His mind raced as he shrugged helplessly. Everyone, to be honest, I didn't expect things to turn out this way either. Chapter 636. Indeed, Lin Jin didn't expect this. He was just here to join in on the fun and broaden his horizons. At the same time, he wanted to try his luck and see if he could obtain some of the spirit pond's water. Since everyone praised the spirit pond's water, Lin Jin obviously wanted to see just how good it was. Like Zhuomin, he didn't have many goals to begin with. Just like Zhuomin, he would be satisfied with just one scoop of water. To think that the Four Seas Freedom Gourd would be so awesome. Not only did it successfully obtain the spirit pond's water, but it was also a winner-take-all, not leaving any leftovers for the other immortals. Even Lin Jin felt like he was going overboard. But the problem was, Lin Jin had no idea what was going on. How did the Four Seas Freedom Gourd manage to claim all of the spirit pond's water for itself? He had only activated the artifact once, and the actual operation was up to the artifact itself. Sensing the stares coming from all directions, Lin Jin realized that he was about to run into some trouble. After all, no one would allow someone else to claim all of the spirit pond's water for themselves. Lin Jin figured that sharing some of the spirit pond's water wasn't a big deal. It would be best if he could keep the peace. After all, he was a newcomer, so he should keep a low profile. What he did earlier was too high profile. Sure enough, after the immortals recovered from their shock, they reacted. With a look of jealousy, one of the immortals stepped forward and said, "My friend, aren't you being a little too overbearing?" He clearly thought that Lin Jin had purposely used his supernatural powers to claim all of the spirit pond's water. Only an expert could do that. Had he been alone, this immortal wouldn't have dared to stand up for him. But with so many people here and the majority of them were dissatisfied, There was nothing to be afraid of. As soon as the immortal finished speaking, Buddhist Immortal Dew Water chanted and said, "Fellow Taoist, your abilities are brilliant. I admire you, admire you. Impress my ass. Jealous?" Lin Jin could tell that Buddha Fairy's eyes had turned red from anxiety, so it would be strange if he didn't feel anxious now. After all, he was the one who had taken the most water from the spirit pond in the past. But now, not a single drop had been harvested. The drastic change in his mentality was incomparable to others. As expected, the fat monk said, "Your divine power is brilliant, but you are too greedy. In the past, I only took a jar of spiritual water because I understand the principle of everyone sharing the benefits. Fellow Taoist, you shouldn't have." With two people taking the lead, the others also glared angrily at him and spoke up. "Fellow Taoist, you don't look familiar. May I know how to address you?" A tall immortal asked with an unfriendly expression. Since someone had asked him a question, Lin Jin couldn't just keep quiet. He saluted them and said, "I'm Lin Jin. Greetings, fellow cultivators." At the end of the day, Lin Jin had been through a lot. Even when facing so many immortals, other than feeling a little nervous at first, Lin Jin was now able to handle them with ease. At the very least, he wouldn't show it. After all, Lin Jin often pretended to be an expert curator. If he had shown any signs of fear while acting as the curator, wouldn't he have been seen through long ago? Because of this, Lin Jin had always had a firm grasp on things like reputation and aura. There would never be a problem, just like now. Even though he was being glared at by so many immortals and they were clearly up to no good, Lin Jin was still able to talk and laugh with them confidently. Of course, this would be confusing. Uncertainty would lead to fear, and fear would deter them from acting recklessly. This was the result Lin Jin wanted. After all, deep down, he was still quite nervous. He was thinking about how he could share some of the spiritual pond's water with them in a dignified manner. Not only could he resolve the crisis, but he wouldn't embarrass himself. Hence, as he spoke, Lin Jin grabbed the 4C's Freedom Gourd and secretly inspected it, wanting to check the spiritual pond's water he had just absorbed. However, a single glance made Lin Jin's forehead break out in cold sweat. It was gone. Lin Jin secretly invoked a spell. When he looked again, it was gone. It didn't exist. There was no trace of the spiritual pond's water inside the 4C's Freedom Gourd. That was strange. For a moment, Lin Jin was at a loss. He immediately realized that if there was no water in the gourd, he wouldn't be able to give it to them later. The immortals would definitely assume that he was the one who took it. Forget the others. Even Zhuo Min and Wanderer Huangshe would have their opinions. It wouldn't be right for them to not share it with their friends. But the problem was, Lin Jin hadn't even seen it, so how was he supposed to share it? Treasure gourd, don't you dare scam me. Lin Jin couldn't care less now. He quickly picked up the 4C's Freedom Gourd to investigate further. When the other immortals saw Lin Jin pick up the magical artifact that he had used to absorb the spiritual pond's water, they were startled. They braced themselves for a fight. After all, Lin Jin had a grim expression on his face. Was he planning to fight his way out? But the problem was, it wasn't time to turn hostile yet. They hadn't even turned hostile yet, so why would Lin Jin, who had benefited greatly from it, be the first to turn hostile? That being said, this immortal named Lin Jin was definitely not someone to be trifled with. It was obvious from how he had absorbed all the spiritual pond's water with just a magical artifact. After all, the spiritual pond had been activated many times over the past few centuries, and no one had ever managed to do this. Many of the itinerant immortals turned to Immortal Dew of Immortal Physician sect. Immortal Dew, you have to say something. That's right. Everyone has always had a share of this spiritual pond. This man has never seen it before, and he wants to take it all. This is against the rules. Elder Dew, you have to uphold justice. Everyone was talking at once. Old Immortal Dew was fuming. After all, he was here to take some of the spiritual pond's water back for pelletization. Usually, with his cultivation and extraction method, it would be a piece of cake for him to retrieve some of the spiritual pond's water. But this time, he didn't get a single drop of water. The spiritual pond's water was extremely important to his pelletization. For the past few decades, he had been waiting for the spiritual water to concoct several types of pills. If he lost it this time, he would have to wait another 100 years. Even for an immortal, this was a long time. Old Immortal Dew was anxious because he couldn't wait that long for certain matters. Thus, he coughed lightly and stepped forward, saying, "Fellow Taoist Lin, your divine arts are brilliant, and we all admire you. Although the water of the spirit pool belongs to those who are capable, it's the first time I've seen someone like fellow Taoist Lin who took it all for himself and didn't share a single bit with others. Fellow Taoist Lin, this old man has something to say that I would like to ask you to keep in mind. Heaven and earth treasures, everyone who sees them has a share. Being greedy and hoarding them is a great taboo. There has never been a good ending for it." His tone was lecturing again. There was even a hint of threat in it. Lin Jin frowned. He didn't like hearing this. Yes, he should respect the old and cherish the young. But the problem was that he had to consider the occasion and the actual situation. Lin Jin wasn't the type to enjoy the winner-take-all, nor did he like hoarding everything for himself. But the problem was, he was helpless right now. Moreover, when these immortals saw that the spiritual pond's water was empty, they immediately panicked and tried all sorts of threats and promises. Even old Immortal Dew personally came forward. It was as if Lin Jin didn't share some of the spiritual pond's water, he would be breaking the rules and wouldn't end well. Ugh, it seemed like that was the case. Even if he didn't like to hear it, he reckoned that everyone would have the same thoughts when it came to this matter. He was the same, who said that immortals didn't have jealousy. Chapter 637. Lin Jin knew full well that he was quite capable. Back in Middle-earth, he could do whatever he wanted. Even if he had to face premium countries and top forces, he could do whatever he wanted. He didn't need to care about others at all. Strength was his source of confidence. But the problem was they were in a foreign land. Forget about their treasures. Just their physical strength alone was enough to crush Lin Jin. They were all immortals. Fortunately, Lin Jin could make up for his weaknesses in other areas. He had many powerful treasures that could rival immortals. In addition, he had the immortal-level Ghost Blood Beast to protect himself. If a fight broke out, Lin Jin wouldn't give them away for nothing. The problem was Lin Jin couldn't retrieve any of the Spirit Pond's water. All of it had been sucked into the Four Seas Freedom Gourd. Lin Jin took a closer look and concluded that the water had most likely been swallowed by the Four Seas Freedom Gourd's water reservoir armor. In other words, it had already been swallowed into his stomach. What was swallowed couldn't be spat out, nor could it be spat out. The situation was tense. What surprised Lin Jin was that giant spirits Zhuo Min and Huangshi didn't abandon him. Instead, they stood guard around him, waiting for an opportunity. The silly bear also seemed to have sensed the hostility in the surroundings, and a terrifying battle intent also emanated from its body. After all, Silly Bear was already full. Once he was full, his strength would multiply. Silly Bear alone could take on multiple immortals. Lin Jin assessed their combat strength. Even so, if a fight broke out, Lin Jin would be the one at a disadvantage. Moreover, he would be dragging Zhuo Min and Huangshi down with him. They treated him as a friend, so Lin Jin couldn't drag them down with him. However, there was no way he could take out the Spirit Pond's water. Explain? Even if he told them the truth, no one would believe him. Lin Jin couldn't be bothered to explain either. If he wanted to resolve this crisis, he would have to find another way. Just then, an idea struck Lin Jin. Lin Jin spotted the immortals and immediately saluted them. "My friends from Xiandao sect, I'm acquainted with your esteemed sect's Chun Xiankong. It was my master who taught you how to chase away the black mountain honey badgers. I'm here to visit Xiandao sect as well." The moment those words came out, all the celestials were startled. They all looked toward the Xiandao sect celestials. The Xiandao sect was very famous in the foreign lands. It was a true celestial sect. During the golden age of the celestial path, it was an existence that stood at the peak. Even now, they were one of the most powerful forces in the foreign territory, especially the Xiandao sect's Taoist Miao Yin. He was a true celestial that had lived for 3,000 years. Normal loose celestials wouldn't dare to provoke him. The celestials from the Xiandao sect were also startled. The leader looked surprised as he sized up Lin Jin before asking, "Could you be the disciple of immortal unfettered that senior brother Xian Kong mentioned?" Lin Jin nodded. Hiss. As soon as these words were spoken, everyone present gasped in shock. Great immortal Xiaoyao? What a joke. Ever since the fall of the immortal path 2,000 years ago, no one had heard of immortal Xiaoyao. Now, in the foreign lands, true immortals were revered, and immortal Xiaoyao had become a legend. So when they heard the Xiandao sect celestial call immortal Xiaoyao's disciple, including the fat monk Du Shui and old immortal Du, they all felt as if a bucket of cold water had been poured over their heads. The disciple of immortal Xiaoyao was not an existence they could provoke. Forget monopolizing the spirit pool's water. Even if the other party beat them up or spat on their faces, they wouldn't dare to say a word. Those who were more timid were already sweating and thinking about running away. But there were also those who were skeptical. The great calamity of the immortal path, the power of the heavens, had instantly killed all the immortal Xiaoyao. In other words, there could no longer be any immortal Xiaoyao in this world. For thousands of years, who had ever seen one? No one had. For a disciple of immortal Xiaoyao to suddenly appear out of nowhere, no matter how they looked at it, it was impossible. Could it be that Lin Jin and Xiandao sect are working together to put on a show? Someone mused. Clearly, quite a number of people shared the same thought. After all, this meant that the Xiandao sect could monopolize all the spirit pool's water. It wasn't impossible. For a moment, shock and doubt filled the immortals' minds. Lin Jin nodded at the Xiandao sect immortal. Then, he led Zhuo Men, Huang Shi, and Han Xiong over. Along the way, no one dared to stop them. "How should I address you, my friend?" Lin Jin asked the Xiandao sect immortal. The latter was obviously much older than Lin Jin, but he didn't dare to be rude. He quickly saluted and said, "Xiandao sect's Lu Xuanji." "Oh, brother Xuanji." Lin Jin returned the salute. Although he looked calm on the surface, he was actually secretly delighted. Not bad at all. Lin Jin didn't expect things to go so smoothly. He was just trying to use Xiandao sect's strength to help him get out of trouble. But he didn't expect Lu Xuanji to be so tactful. Even Lin Jin blushed when he heard him call him immortal unfettered's disciple. But this wasn't a matter of shame. As long as he could get out of trouble, he didn't mind losing face. Moreover, this was actually a matter of pride. Once the title of immortal unfettered's disciple got out, basically no one would dare to provoke him. Even the aggressive old immortal Du and the other itinerant immortals had all given up and behaved themselves. No one brought up the matter of the spirit pool's water again. It was still the same saying. No matter where you go, the one with the bigger fist is the one in the right. Hence, only by being in the right can one travel the world. I was planning to pay a visit to the Xiandao sect and happened to run into you, Brother Xuanji. Would you be willing to lead the way? Lin Jin asked politely. Lu Xuanji couldn't have asked for more. He had long forgotten about the spirit pond's water. Or rather, he didn't dare to pursue the matter any further. Moreover, he was still wondering who Lin Jin was to be able to collect all the water in the spirit pond in such a short period of time. Now, the mystery was solved. Wasn't it normal for a disciple of immortal unfettered's level to be capable of this? Perhaps Lin Jin was here to collect the spirit pool's water on his master's orders. Xiandao sect didn't want the spirit pool's water anyway. Now that Lin Jin wanted to pay a visit to the sect, he immediately took the initiative to lead the way. Still, no one dared to stop him. It was one thing to be suspicious, but no one dared to go up and stop them. What if he was a mortal unfettered's disciple? Wouldn't that be suicide? Even if they were reluctant, there was nothing they could do. And so, they could only watch as Lin Jin swaggered away. Giant spirits Zhuo Men and Huang Shi felt like they were in a dream. They had planned to fight with their lives, but who knew there would be light at the end of the tunnel? However, if Lin Jin was a mortal unfettered's disciple, They couldn't help but feel a sense of distance. The group left the valley. Once they were outside, Zhuamin and Huangshi wanted to bid farewell. Chapter 638. After all, they weren't qualified to visit Xiandao sect. Lin Jin could tell what the two immortals were thinking. Zhuamin and Huangshi were willing to stay by his side in times of crisis and even help him fend off the immortals. Just because of this, Lin Jin was determined to be friends with them. If you two consider me a friend, let's go to Xiandao sect together. Even if there's anything else, we can talk about it after we come out of Xiandao sect. Lin Jin stopped them. Seeing that it was difficult to refuse, Zhuamin and Huangshi nodded in agreement. To be honest, the two of them were a bit nervous. After all, in their eyes, the Xiandao sect was a high and mighty sect. Normally, the disciples of the Xiandao sect wouldn't even look them in the eye. It would be a lie to say they weren't excited to be treated as guests. Along the way, Lu Xuanji was polite. He had also used Xiandao sect's special communication method to send a message back to Xiandao sect. Currently, somewhere in Xiandao sect, Chun Xiankong was cultivating. His position in the Xiandao sect was not low. Although he was a disciple, he was definitely one of the top few disciples. This was because the Xiandao sect was the same as the other sections. Most of the ancestors had died in the calamity, so the only one left was Miao Yan. Other than spiritual master Miao Yan, the rest were mostly pseudo-immortal elders. As one of the top two disciples, Chun Xiankong naturally became a mainstay of the sect. Just then, someone outside said, "Senior brother Xiankong, the sect master has ordered you to go to the Hung Hall immediately." Did something happen? Chun Xiankong was stunned. Logically speaking, spiritual master Miao Yan wouldn't summon him if it wasn't something important. I heard that an honored guest has arrived. The disciple outside clearly didn't know the details. Honored guest? Chun Xiankong was confused, but soon he thought of something and a look of pleasant surprise appeared on his face. Could it be? At the thought of that possibility, Chun Xiankong couldn't be in the mood to cultivate anymore. He immediately got up and transformed into a ray of light that flew out of the cultivation area. Soon, he arrived at the Hung Hall. Spiritual Master Miao Yan had been waiting inside the hall for a long time. Besides him, all the elders and disciples of Xiandao sect had arrived one after another. "Greetings, sect master." Chun Xiankong stepped forward and bowed. "Xiankong." Reverend Miao Yan smiled. Xianji sent a message saying that Immortal Carefree's disciple is on his way here. Just as you said, he really did come to visit the mountain. "Is your name Lin Jin?" "That's the name on the letter." "That's right." After some thought, Chun Xiankong asked, "I heard that Junior Xuanji went to the Queen Fairy Spirit Pond. How did you run into Lin Jin?" Spiritual Master Miao Yan's expression turned grim. "Your junior brother Xuanji said that Lin Jin used his supernatural powers to collect all the water from the spirit pond for the past 100 years, leaving not a single drop for anyone else." Chun Xiankong raised his eyebrows. "That's impossible. The spirit pond's water is the most mysterious. It was condensed from the immortal artifact left behind by Mother Immortal. Although that artifact has been destroyed, no one can take it away. The spirit pond's water has been condensed for hundreds of years. At times, it's ethereal, and at other times, it's as heavy as 10,000 caddies. An average immortal can only take a small bottle. Those with higher cultivation levels can use specialized artifacts to take more, but no one has ever been able to take all of it. I've never even heard of it before." Spiritual Master Miao Yan nodded. "That's right. I've gone to the spirit pond's water before. Back then, Spiritual Master Xianyue and I each took a third of it. The remaining third was distributed to some itinerant immortals. If I wanted to take all of it, I'm afraid I wouldn't be able to." Spiritual Master Miao Yan knew this well. The spirit pond's water was under a special restriction. It was almost impossible for one person to monopolize it. However, there were exceptions to everything. And this time it had happened. I can only say that this Lin Jin isn't as simple as he seems. Perhaps he's here to take the spirit pond's water on his master's orders. Spiritual Master Miao Yan speculated. Having said that, spiritual master Miao Yan's mind seemed to be racing as he mumbled, "Ever since the great calamity of immortality, there have been no more carefree immortals in this world. What kind of supernatural power does this great immortal curator possess to be able to survive? Also, I've never heard of this immortal in the outer realm. Where did he come from? Could he be in Middle-earth? But if he's in Middle-earth, how did he avoid that immortal devouring beast attack?" There are too many questions, but no answers. Even a true immortal like spiritual master Miao Yan was troubled. Just then, a unique aura appeared. The immortals were stunned before they hurried forward. At the entrance of the hall, a young man appeared. He looked to be around 12 or 13 years old. His clothes were simple, but he had a unique aura about him. Only the young man's face was pale and sickly, as if he wasn't feeling well. And it was this young man that even spiritual master Miao Yan treated with utmost respect. He actually went forward to greet him. "Mr. Qi, what brings you here?" "Greetings, Mr. Qi." The other disciples, such as Chen Xiankong, all came forward and respectfully bowed. Those who didn't understand the situation would be shocked and confused, but disciples of the Xiandao sect would know Mr. Qi's position in the Xiandao sect. Mr. Qi was not an ordinary immortal. Strictly speaking, he was a demon immortal, and not an ordinary demon immortal. He was an existence that fought alongside spiritual master Miao Yan's teacher, Shang Xian. 3,000 years ago, he became the sect guardian beast of the Xiandao sect and received offerings from many disciples. During the great calamity of immortality, he protected some of the Xiandao sect's disciples and allowed them to escape. Otherwise, the Xiandao sect would have been completely destroyed. However, it was also because of this that Mr. Qi was seriously injured. Although he didn't immediately die, he had been in seclusion all these years to recover. However, how could this injury be so easy to recover from? His cultivation level had fallen from the carefree immortal level to the true immortal level. Now, he couldn't even maintain his true immortal level and had fallen to the hollow immortal level. Everyone knew that if this continued, Mr. Qi would be in danger. There was an 80 to 90% chance that he would fall here, his body and Dao vanishing. This became a sore point for everyone in the Xiandao sect, especially spiritual master Miao Yan, who was extremely anxious. Over the years, he had tried everything he could to visit the remaining immortals and even threw away his face, but none of them could save him. In the end, he was helpless. However, because his disciple, Chen Xiankong, had a fortuitous encounter and entered that mysterious place, he met the curator, who might be a carefree immortal. This gave spiritual master Miao Yan a glimmer of hope. This was because Chen Xiankong had said that the curator had boasted that as long as it was a fierce beast, demonic beast, or celestial beast, they could ask him for a solution. Mr. Qi also knew about this, and it was probably because of this that Mr. Qi personally appeared today. "I've stayed in the house for too long and wanted to come out for a walk. You guys don't need to worry about me. Just do what you need to do." Mr. Qi's voice was very young, but it was because his foundation was damaged. Every time he was injured, his age would decrease. 500 years ago, he looked like he was in his 20s, but now he looked like he was 12 or 13 years old. When he becomes a child, he won't be able to live for long. Although Mr. Qi said this, spiritual master Miao Yan and Chen Xiankong both knew that he came because he heard that the disciple of the mysterious carefree immortal was coming. At this moment, spiritual master Miao Yan ordered, "It's about time. Xiankong, bring some people to the sect to greet him." Chapter 639. Spiritual Master Miao Yan was the sect master. If Curator had come in person, he would have welcomed him personally. But since he was only a disciple, he had to follow the rules and let Chen Xiankong go instead. Chen Xiankong quickly accepted the order and led his two disciples to welcome the guest. After all, this wasn't the Nine Heavens realm or mountain of 10,000 immortals. However, Xiandao sect had chosen a decent mountain as their base, and it looked quite majestic. Chen Xiankong and the other two waited quietly at the entrance. After a long time, they saw a cloud floating in front of them. The people on the cloud became clearer, and they could see several juniors from Xiandao sect among them. Chun Xiankong perked up and immediately went up to welcome them. Since when did Junior Xuanji's cloud riding skills become so amazing? Chun Xiankong was still thinking. The cloud was huge, and there were quite a lot of people on it. Other than the immortals from Xiandao sect, there were two other people. One was a giant spirit, and the other was an even larger bear. To carry so many things with a cloud riding skill, especially a bear the size of a small mountain, wasn't something an average immortal could do. That was why Chun Xiankong was shocked. But the next moment, Chun Xiankong realized that the person riding the cloud wasn't his junior, Lu Xuanji. Instead, it was a young man standing on the clouds. This young man had an extraordinary aura. A sword and a gourd hung from his waist, and strands of cloud silk wrapped around his feet, allowing him to control the cloud. Chun Xiankong immediately recognized that this young man was Curator S. disciple, Lin Jin. Their temperaments were very similar, very similar. Just from this point, it was easy to recognize that the clouds had fallen and the celestials had landed. Giant Spirit Sect's left sect master and Huang Shi, who had come to the Xiandao sect for the first time, curiously looked around. Han Xiong also looked left and right. After all, compared to the other places that were filled with smoke, the Xiandao sect was protected by a special formation. It was very different. Senior Xiankong. Lu Xuanji went up and briefly explained the situation. Chun Xiankong saluted Lin Jin. Greetings, Brother Lin. Xiandao sect's Chun Xiankong. As he spoke, he had been observing Lin Jin. However, Chun Xiankong was surprised to find no immortal aura on Lin Jin. It felt like he was facing a mortal cultivator. This was exactly what the curator had said. After all, the curator had made it very clear that his disciple was just a mortal. But the problem was, could a mortal have such a brilliant cloud riding technique? But on second thought, Chun Xiankong felt relieved. Since he was curator's disciple, anything was possible. After all, Qin Yunshang and even perfected Black Moon of the Cloud Dao sect had once said that there was a vast heavenly Dao aura within the visitor's door that had appeared out of nowhere. Since ancient times, only great immortals, carefree immortals, had been able to peek into the heavenly Dao. This was why the Xiandao sect and the Yundao sect were certain that this mysterious curator was at the carefree celestial realm. Lin Jin politely returned the greeting. He had arrived at Xiandao sect much earlier than he had expected. Based on his initial plan, he would first travel around the foreign lands to find the whereabouts of the Nine Suns crystal. However, since he had met people from the Xiandao sect, he might as well take this opportunity to visit them. Chun Xiankong might not know about the Nine Sun crystal, but the rest of the Xiandao sect might know about it. Even if they didn't have it, it would be fine as long as they had some information. Moreover, Chun Xiankong had mentioned that he wanted Lin Jin's help in treating one of their immortal beasts. Now that he was here, Lin Jin could do it. After some small talk, Chun Xiankong led Lin Jin and the others into Xiandao sect. Truth be told, it wasn't just Titan Spirit sect and Huang Shi who were curious. It was also Lin Jin's first time stepping into a real immortal sect. Everything before him was something he had never seen before. Many of the buildings in Xiandao sect, including pavilions and terraces, could be levitated in the air. Lin Jin guessed that they must have used some kind of formation or some other mysterious trick. Other than that, there were many spiritual beasts in Xiandao sect, just like the large fish swimming in the pond before them. To Lin Jin, they weren't as simple as they looked. They were all rank 4 fish beasts. It wouldn't be an exaggeration to say that any one of these fish could easily defeat a small country. Even the guardian beasts of many intermediate countries might not be a match for one of these fish. Other than that, Lin Jin also saw a house moving slowly in the distance. Chun Xiankong told Lin Jin that it was a moving scripture pavilion. If a disciple wanted to read a scripture of the sect, they could just go there and get it. Lin Jin could clearly see that underneath this scripture pavilion was a giant drought tortoise. In other words, this giant tortoise was carrying a gigantic scripture pavilion on its back. If this scene were to be seen in Middle-earth, it would surely shock the world. But in Xian Dao's sect, it was a common sight, so no one was surprised by it. A rank 6 immortal beast. As Lin Jin approached, he stroked the giant tortoise and immediately knew its rank. As expected of a proper immortal sect, they had such a rich heritage. A rank 6 immortal beast was only responsible for carrying the scripture pavilion around the sect. From another perspective, Lin Jin now knew how terrifying the Black Mountain honey badger that blocked the entrance to Xian Dao sect was. To be able to subdue such a large sect, that Black Mountain honey pot must be even more terrifying. Lin Jin knew that the Black Mountain honey badger was rank 7. Although rank 7 and rank 6 were only one realm apart, the difference in strength was like night and day. After enjoying the scenery of the immortal sect along the way, the group arrived at the everlasting hall. Lin Jin stared at the massive hall hovering in the air, his heart filled with awe. Below the hall, there were scattered floating pillars that spiraled upwards. Even the ancient cypress trees were doing the same. Some were perched on the rocks, while others had their roots dangling down. It was a beautiful sight to behold. Above the floating hall, an old immortal with a ramrod's straight body greeted them with a smile. One look and Lin Jin could tell that this old immortal was powerful, far stronger than himself and any other immortal Lin Jin had met before. True immortal. This thought popped into Lin Jin's mind. Chun Xiankong mentioned that the true immortal of Xian Dao sect was spiritual Master Miao Yan. If his guess was right, this person should be him. Lin Jin also remembered that when he first met Patriarch Xue Pao, he pretended to be a disciple of Xian Dao sect. Patriarch Xue Pao mentioned that he had received pointers from spiritual Master Miao Yan and that they were trying to establish a relationship. Now, it seemed like Patriarch Xue Pao knew a thing or two about Xian Dao sect. Otherwise, he wouldn't have known who spiritual Master Miao Yan was. Of course, it was also possible that Patriarch Xue Pao heard rumors and used them as a cover. But Lin Jin could ask spiritual Master Miao Yan about this later. If it was true, then spiritual Master Miao Yan had done something wrong. After all, Patriarch Xue Pao had been acting recklessly in Middle-earth. If Patriarch Miao Yan were to pursue the matter, he would have to bear the blame as well. Chapter 640. That's our Xian Dao sect's sect master, spiritual master Profound Miao. Chun Xiankong introduced as he led Lin Jin up the stairs. Dao friend Lin, the two of us will wait below for the time being. Huang Shi whispered at this time. Zhuan Min nodded in agreement. They were mere itinerant immortals with strength equivalent to intermediate pseudo-immortals. They couldn't even compare to most of Xian Dao sect's average disciples. It would be a lie to say they weren't nervous when faced with a true immortal. Spiritual Master Profound Miao's name resounded like thunder among the itinerant immortals. He was so famous that he was like a mountain in the eyes of itinerant immortals. Spiritual Master Profound Miao wanted to meet Lin Jin, and they knew their place. If they went up without a true immortal summoning them, it would be rude of them. They understood this. Lin Jin was aware of their concerns, so he didn't force them. If that's the case, please wait here, Lin Jin said. Chun Xiankong smiled. Feel free to walk around. If you're bored, you can read the scriptures over there. Having said that, he followed Lin Jin up the stairs. Zhuan Min and Huang Shi breathed a sigh of relief. They were overjoyed. It was already a great opportunity for them to enter Xian Dao sect together. Not only did they broaden their horizons, but Chun Xiankong also mentioned that they could read the sect's cultivation scriptures. This was a great benefit. Although itinerant cultivators like them had their own inheritances, their foundations couldn't compare to a proper disciple of an immortal sect. This was partly due to the cultivation scriptures. The scriptures in an immortal sect were obviously much better than what they usually came into contact with. They weren't even on the same level. Hence, with this opportunity, the benefits they could reap were self-evident. They obviously wouldn't waste this opportunity. In fact, they couldn't wait for Lin Jin to stay at Xian Dao sect for a little longer. It would be best if he could stay for a few days. ignoring Zhuamin and Huangshi, who were overjoyed and hurrying over to the giant turtle. Lin Jin had already arrived at the main hall. He bowed to Spiritual Master Profound Meow. Greetings, Spiritual Master Profound Meow. Lin Jin was very respectful. After all, the person in front of him was a true immortal. Based on the level of ferocious beasts, he would at least be at the 7th level. Spiritual Master Meow, Yin nodded with a smile. He had been studying Lin Jin from head to toe since the beginning. He even activated his immortal spirit, eye, so he could see things differently from others. He could tell that Lin Jin was just a mortal without any signs of ascending to immortality. However, there were 2 tyrannical powers hidden within his body. One was in his right arm, which was as hot as the sun, and the other covered his entire body, which was like a demon made of blood. Just the power of the blood demon that covered his entire body was comparable to that of a void immortal. True immortal cleverness words was a very rare sight. It seemed more like a magical beast taming technique from some other immortal school. Unfortunately, Reverend Meow Yin did not have a deep understanding of the art of taming beasts, so he did not investigate further. When he looked at Lin Jin again, he noticed the sword and gourd hanging from his waist. At the sight of the sword, Reverend Meow Yin nodded slightly. This sword was sentient and also possessed the power of a void immortal. It was worthy of being called an immortal sword. Having cultivated for thousands of years, Reverend Meow Yin had his own immortal sword hidden in the Meru Dharma realm. He could retrieve it whenever he needed it. Although the immortal sword hanging from Lin Jin's waist was incomparable to his own, it was comparable to some so-called sword immortals. As for the gourd, Reverend Meow Yin frowned when he saw it. This gourd has an extraordinary origin. Reverend Meow Yin's eyes glinted as he made a guess. In an instant, his steadfast Taoist heart gave birth to a hint of greed. It was for no other reason than the fact that others couldn't resist the preciousness of this gourd. However, Reverend Meow Yin had lived for thousands of years and lived through the golden age of immortals. Few could match his knowledge. He could tell that this gourd was extremely similar to the immortal artifact that belonged to a celestial unfettered in the immortal palace. In fact, Reverend Meow Yin was 80% sure that this was the immortal gourd in that celestial unfettered's possession. This was an artifact personally refined by celestial unfettered. It was so powerful that even Reverend Meow Yin coveted it. He even had the urge to take it for himself. In his hands, this item can hardly be used to its full potential. If it's in my hands, it can definitely shine brilliantly. Maybe even true immortal cleverness thought. Lin Jin could obviously sense the true immortal's intent. In that instant, Lin Jin felt as if a mountain was pressing down on him, rendering him immobile. The pressure was so oppressive that he found it hard to breathe. But in the next moment, this invisible pressure vanished without a trace, as if it had never been there. That was because Spiritual Master Wondrous Yin saw the faint outline of a door behind Lin Jin. This startled Reverend Meow Yin. He was truly shocked because in that instant, Taoist Master Meow Yin seemed to have sensed a trace of the will of the heavenly Tao from the door. It was as if a bucket of cold water had been poured over his head, instantly waking him up from his greed. After Reverend Meow Yin regained his senses, he felt ashamed. He had almost been possessed just now. This was also because the gourd hanging on Lin Jin's waist was too attractive to him. No matter how high one's cultivation level was, there was always something that could drive them crazy and evoke their desires. I'm ashamed, Reverend Meow Yin suddenly said. He no longer looked at the gourd to prevent any evil thoughts from arising. Even without that door behind Lin Jin, Reverend Meow Yin wouldn't have made the same mistake again. Forget acting on it. He shouldn't even have the slightest bit of evil thoughts. Lin Jin smiled apologetically. He didn't know what happened earlier, but he knew that he had just narrowly escaped death. Truth be told, if Reverend Meow Yin really harbored evil intentions towards him, Lin Jin wouldn't have been able to stop him. His methods might work against a pseudo-immortal, but against a true immortal upper-level existence, it was like a joke. He had been too careless. Lin Jin felt like he had been careless this time, but it was too late to regret it now. Fortunately, Reverend Miao Yin seemed to have returned to normal. Lin Jin then noticed someone standing behind Reverend Miao Yin. It was a young man. He looked to be about 12 or 13 years old. He had rosy lips and white teeth, looking rather handsome. His clothes were also very fitting, and he had an otherworldly aura about him. But after a second glance, Lin Jin frowned. As a beast appraiser, and possibly the highest-ranked one at that, Lin Jin had seen tens of thousands of beasts in the past. Lin Jin was an experienced beast appraiser. Now, Lin Jin could roughly identify any beast, especially monsters that could shapeshift. With just one glance, Lin Jin could tell if they were humans or beasts. Lin Jin could tell that the young man standing behind Reverend Miao Yin wasn't human. However, Lin Jin couldn't tell what kind of monster he was. After all, he had never touched one before. It was impressive enough that he could tell just by looking. Perhaps sensing Lin Jin's gaze, the young man looked over and their eyes met. Chapter 641. After exchanging glances with Ghost Eye Granny, Lin Jin had learned a thing or two about psychic attacks. Truth be told, Lin Jin definitely had an innate advantage in terms of psychic cultivation. He had the Museum of Deadly Beasts. Every time he mentally traversed through the collection to research on beasts and research methods to cure them, he would have to use his psychic power to enter the museum. As time went by, Lin Jin's psychic power had been trained by the museum to become incredibly resilient and powerful. Just like a young man who had never practiced martial arts before, he had a strong physique since he was young. His stamina was more than 10 times that of his peers, and his physique was 1 in a million. If a talent like this were to learn martial arts one day, would he be able to improve by leaps and bounds? That was for sure. It could be said that Ghost Eye Granny's attack had opened a door for Lin Jin. It was as if she had poked open a paper window, allowing him to see a whole new world. Outside Xian Dao Sec's everlasting hall, Lin Jin and the young man, standing behind spiritual master Miao Yin, locked eyes. Immediately, Lin Jin sensed a psyche trying to infiltrate and spy on him. Impudent. Lin Jin was obviously upset. After all, he was a guest, and this inhuman young man was trying to spy on him. Was he relying on his powerful psychic power? This reminded Lin Jin of Ghost Eye Granny. Didn't she try to kill Lin Jin with a glare just because she was proficient in psychic spells? She ended up asking for trouble. Although this young man meant no harm, Lin Jin's place wasn't a public restroom where he could come and go as he pleased. Lin Jin decided to play a trick. He deliberately let his guard down and allowed the man's psyche to enter. He could sense that the man's psyche was delighted and even pleased with himself. It was the kind of arrogance that came from someone who felt that no one would notice even if he had done something bad. Then, the psyche began searching and probing. Just then, Lin Jin abruptly cut off the man's path of retreat. It was as if he was waiting for a thief to enter the house, and then suddenly locked the door. This was going to get interesting. The consciousness of the other party froze for a moment. Then he tried to leave. However, he realized that he could not leave at all. This time around, he was clearly flustered. Lin Jin's ability to seal off his psyche was self-taught. As the saying went, offense and defense are interlinked. After fighting Ghost Eye twice, and after some pondering, Lin Jin managed to come up with a spell that utilized psyche. Now that he was putting it into practice, it was surprisingly effective. The teenager's brows were tightly knitted together, but he didn't move an inch. Lin Jin was the same. But because he was unprepared, Lin Jin actually had the upper hand. Perhaps false immortals with insufficient cultivation bases wouldn't be able to detect a battle of divine will, but for a true immortal like Reverend Miao Yin, it would be a problem if he couldn't detect it. At this moment, Reverend Miao Yin was the first to notice the problem. With a careful look, he knew what was going on. It was Mr. Qi who was curious, so he tried to probe Lin Jin with his psyche. He thought it would be a sure thing, but who knew he would be trapped by Lin Jin's psyche? This was simply unbelievable. Although Mr. Qi's strength had been greatly reduced due to his injuries and his psyche was much weaker. He was once a glorious man. On the other hand, Lin Jin was a mere mortal, yet his psyche was so strong that it was comparable to a true immortal. He really is a mortal, unfettered disciple. Reverend Miao, Yin mused. Mr. Qi was clearly in the wrong here. After all, it was Mr. Qi who tried to probe Lin Jin with his psyche first, which was why he was trapped. Reverend Miao Yin couldn't act recklessly either. Invoking a spell, he sent his psyche out to where Lin Jin was. Mr. Qi's divine sense was in the middle of it, unable to move up, down, left, or right. Mr. Qi was clearly panicking. He began to run around randomly, hoping to use his psyche's brute force to break out. However, the surrounding clouds were extremely tight, and the clouds were very resilient. It was like a giant net in all directions, and there was no way to break through. Every time he tried, he would be bounced back. Just then, a vague silhouette appeared outside the clouds. It was Lin Jin's psyche. Staring at Mr. Qi within the clouds, Lin Jin mused, "How dare a brat plot against me?" Of course, strictly speaking, it wasn't a plot. After all, Mr. Qi wasn't hostile and was completely different from the ghost-eyed granny. He was just probing. But Lin Jin didn't like it. Just then, Lin Jin heard a commotion inside the Museum of Deadly Beasts. Turning around, he froze. There was a new entry in the museum, and it was the brat he trapped. When Lin Jin saw who it was, he was stunned. Oh my God! Lin Jin felt his hair stand on end as he read the information in the museum. If his divine will had hairs on it. Rank 8 Immortal Beast, Qilin, a tribute of thunder and lightning. Paragon of Beasts, remarkable. Damaged foundation, cultivation greatly reduced. There are 3 ways to treat it, namely, ignoring everything else. Just the first line alone made Lin Jin's scalp tingle. Rank 8 Immortal Beast? Was this a joke? He actually trapped a rank 8 Immortal Beast. It felt like he was digging his own grave. This was the reason why Lin Jin was afraid. But soon, he realized that if this rank 8 Qilin was really that powerful, it shouldn't be unable to break out of a newbie's psyche predicament. Right, it's injured. Lin Jin immediately checked the Qilin's injuries. After a careful study, he nodded to himself. No wonder. This Mr. Qilin had been seriously injured, even to the extent that his foundation was damaged. It was really lucky that he was still alive. With this kind of injury, any genuine immortal would definitely die. However, this Qilin immortal beast could actually live for thousands of years with such serious injuries. Impressive indeed. Just then, Lin Jin felt another psyche approaching him. Turning around, he saw a spiritual master Miao Yan's silhouette looming in the distance. Spiritual master Miao Yan saluted him and said, "Brother Lin, Mr. Qilin doesn't mean any harm. He's probably just curious about you, so he used his psyche to check on you. I'm sure you can tell." Spiritual master Miao Yan was very polite. After all, this was a telepathic meeting. Even Chun Xiankong and the others weren't aware of it. Moreover, spiritual master Miao Yan was now certain that Lin Jin's strength was extraordinary. Even if he wasn't an immortal, his knowledge far surpassed that of an average immortal. For example, Lin Jin's psyche seemed extremely stable. Since ancient times, the cultivation of psyche was extremely secretive and rare. Regular itinerant cultivators had no chance of obtaining it. Only a few major immortal sects would have such a legacy. However, to truly condense a psyche was extremely difficult. Not only did it depend on luck, but it also depended on talent. On the other hand, many barbarian immortal shamans were born with powerful psyches. They could use their psyche to perform witchcraft, which was incredibly strange and impossible to guard against. However, Lin Jin wasn't a barbarian immortal shaman. It could only be said that this curator was remarkable to be able to produce such a talented disciple. Spiritual Master Miao Yin glanced at the faintly discernible door behind Lin Jin. He was almost certain that this curator was unfettered immortal. In other words, this rank 8 Qilin had the highest chance of evolving to fight against a rank 9 immortal devouring beast. With this, Lin Jin was obviously happy. However, he wouldn't let his happiness show on his face. After some thought, he let out a dry cough and put on a mysterious smile. Of course I appraise you. In fact, I'm a beast appraiser, a rank 4 beast appraiser. Lin Jin then revealed the 4-ringed beast emblem on his sleeve. But then, he remembered that this wasn't Middle-earth. The immortals of the foreign lands didn't know about beast appraisers, much less their ranks. Sure enough, the immortal Qilin was bewildered, and so was spiritual Master Miao Yin. Lin Jin smiled awkwardly. This is our Middle-earth profession. We specialize in beast appraisals. Immortal beasts are also beasts, so we could tell just by appraising them. As he spoke, Lin Jin flicked his sleeves, looking like an expert. This time, both the immortal Qilin and spiritual Master Miao Yin understood. Mr. Lin, you really are from Middle-earth. Could your master be from Middle-earth as well? Spiritual Master Miao Yin blurted out as if remembering something. Seeing Lin Jin nod, spiritual Master Miao Yin was astounded. The immortal Qilin was now even more interested in Lin Jin's identity as a beast appraiser. He continued asking, Mr. Lin, look at me. What else do you see? Lin Jin knew that the immortal Qilin had a favor to ask, so he spoke on their behalf. I can tell that your injuries are quite severe. His face was filled with worry. The immortal Qilin's breathing quickened, but he took a step forward. Mister, may I ask if you have a way to save me? Chapter 643. Having lived for thousands of years, the immortal Qilin had met countless otherworldly experts. He knew that a healer might not be able to cure an illness, but those who could cure it must be someone who understood the illness. This Lin Jin was able to see through its true form and even tell that it was heavily injured. This was unprecedented, and it lit up the immortal Qilin's hope, even though he had always thought that it was impossible for the immortal Qilin to recover. Spiritual Master Miao Yan's heart was racing. To Xian Dao's sect, the immortal Qilin's injury was the sect's top priority. After all, there might not be another expert of this caliber in the future. Not to mention, the immortal Qilin was of utmost importance in terms of seniority and value. Anyone who could cure the immortal Qilin's old injury would be Xian Dao sect's greatest benefactor. Hence, both of them were staring at Lin Jin, waiting to see what he had to say. They were afraid that Lin Jin would shake his head and say that there was nothing he could do. In the next instant, Lin Jin's lips moved, and he uttered a single word, yes. Simple, direct, and clear. But it was precisely this single word that caused Taoist Miao Yin and the Qilin to be extremely excited. After all, these two were existences with extraordinary identities, cultivation, and status. Of course, they couldn't reveal it completely, but their gazes couldn't deceive others. How do we save it? Spiritual Master Miao Yin asked. Now, as long as Lin Jin mentioned a method, Spiritual Master Miao Yin would immediately verify it. No matter what kind of treasure it was, Spiritual Master Miao Yin would think of a way to obtain it. However, Lin Jin didn't continue. He had prepared more than one method to save the immortal Qilin, and each method was listed in detail in the Museum of Deadly Beasts. If he wanted to, he could just read them out. However, Lin Jin knew that the more precious something was, the more he shouldn't give it away. For example, the injuries of the Qilin immortal beast could not be healed even after a few thousand years. Moreover, it was getting more and more severe. To put it bluntly, if it had not met him, the cultivation of the Qilin immortal beast would have dropped drastically in another 10 years. This method of exchanging cultivation for life was just a waste of time. If the immortal Qilin's cultivation continued to deteriorate, it might even fall back to being a mortal beast. At that time, he wouldn't even be able to maintain the shape-shifting technique, and it was even possible that he wouldn't be able to retain his intelligence. In that case, how was he any different from being dead? If the other party had other methods, they would not have dragged it out until now. In other words, Not even a true immortal would be able to come up with the treatment methods provided by the Museum of Deadly Beasts. What was a priceless treasure? Sometimes it was just a method of treatment. And now, Lin Jin had 3 of them. As the saying went, a rare commodity was worth hoarding. Even if it was for self-preservation, Lin Jin wouldn't foolishly reveal the treatment method. Since Lin Jin didn't speak, spiritual master Miao Yin didn't probe further. Although the immortal Qilin was getting more anxious, it managed to keep its mouth shut. However, its eyes were still fixed on Lin Jin. After a long while, Lin Jin said, "I need time. Also, I need to gather some rare resources." "That's not a problem," Reverend Mian hurriedly said. "There's one more thing that's crucial." Lin Jin had indeed thought of something important, and that was the spirit refining needle. To cure the immortal Kirin, a crucial and necessary step was to use the spirit refinement needle to mend the creature's internal injuries. In this world, Lin Jin's needle was the only one capable of doing this. However, there were different grades of spirit refinement needles. Lin Jin's best weapon was the Thunderfire needle he crafted himself. However, to mend the injuries of an immortal Kirin, even the Thunderfire needle was a little difficult. What Lin Jin needed was a higher grade, Purple Thunder Divine Needle. However, this needle was of an extremely high grade. Purple Thunder was the nobility of thunder. After all, Purple Thunder was revered in the world of immortals. Even human countries had this tradition. Hence, to craft this needle, he needed the Purple Thunder Divine Needle. An average immortal wouldn't be able to use it. Only a true immortal might be able to craft it. In fact, although the Thunderfire needle was of a lower grade, it wasn't as if it couldn't be used to heal the immortal Kirin. It would just take a little more time. But since there was a chance to get his hands on a Purple Thunder Divine Needle, why wouldn't he do it? After elaborating on the matter, Lin Jin said, "The immortal Kirin is of an extremely high rank and possesses the bloodline of a Thunder Kirin. To mend its foundation, the Purple Thunder Divine Needle is the best and most suitable." Lin Jin only said best, but didn't say it was necessary. He was just playing with words. It's just that Lin Jin's cultivation is limited, so he can't craft the Purple Thunder Divine Needle at this stage. What a pity. Lin Jin shook his head and sighed on purpose. It was as if he couldn't do it without this item. What kind of person was Spiritual Master Miao Yin? Now that Mr. Qi's cultivation was greatly damaged, Spiritual Master Miao Yin was the most capable and had the highest cultivation. Hence, no matter how one looked at it, Spiritual Master Miao Yin had to contribute. Sensing Mr. Qi's gaze, Spiritual Master Miao Yin immediately said, "If it's just crafting an artifact, you don't have to worry, Brother Lin. I'll help you with the crafting." This was what Lin Jin was waiting for. If a true immortal can help, that would be great. Chapter 644. Although it was just a question, the meaning was clear. Miao Yin was certain that this was the work of the curator. Lin Jin could obviously tell, so he nodded in acknowledgement without explaining. "Your master is truly a celestial being," Spiritual Master Miao Yin exclaimed. It was very simple, because if he were to come up with a forging method, even if it was a magical treasure that he was most proficient in, he would not be able to do it in such detail. He had to be impressed. "Don't worry, Brother Lin. Leave this Purple Thunderbolt Needle to me. It might take a few days, so please stay at Xian Dao's sect for the time being. You are free to go anywhere in the sect." Since these words came from Spiritual Master Miao Yin, they weren't mere pleasantries. In other words, with these words, Lin Jin could go anywhere he wanted in Xian Dao's sect. Having said that, Spiritual Master Miao Yin went over to chat with the immortal Qilin for a while before bidding him farewell. The immortal Qilin looked exhausted, which was to be expected. Based on Lin Jin's analysis, the immortal Qilin's injuries were not to be underestimated. It had probably been in hibernation for most of the past few years, so it wouldn't be long before it woke up. This was the easiest way to recuperate. If there were no accidents, the immortal Qilin would be going back to sleep for the next few days. Before he left, the immortal Qilin gave Lin Jin something. It was a scale. It was the size of a palm and looked like something a blacksmith forged with 5-colored celestial iron. At first, Lin Jin didn't know what it was, nor did he understand the immortal Qilin's intentions. But after he took it, he knew what it was. "Mr. Lin, do you know what this is?" The immortal Qilin looked expectant. The way it observed Lin Jin seemed to have changed. Lin Jin obviously knew what it was. However, Lin Jin shook his head with a smile. "I can't tell for now. I need to study it." The immortal Qilin thought for a moment. "Mr. Lin, you can keep this for me. If you manage to figure something out, please let me know. I will reward you handsomely." After saying that, he took another look at the scale that he had already handed over, then took his leave. Was there a beast in this world that Lin Jin couldn't identify? Obviously not. The moment Lin Jin picked up the scale, he knew where it came from. Scale of a rank 9 immortal devouring beast. "I didn't expect something like this to exist," Lin Jin mumbled to himself. After giving it some thought, Lin Jin figured out what was going on. The Qilin immortal beast was injured by the immortal devouring beast. At that time, the Qilin immortal beast was an 8th rank immortal beast. It was extremely powerful, and it must have had a huge battle with the immortal devouring beast. The outcome was that the Qilin immortal beast was almost killed, and it suffered a heavy injury from then on and was struggling at death's door.